Horizon Thunder Hello, good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Knights of Last Call. I am Derek Melinda, your host for the evening, and the Game Master for Knights of Last Call. And I have the immense pleasure of welcoming you to tonight's All Classes Ranked. That's right. We did 700 something spells, and now we're back to do 22 classes, as we are wont to do. But of course, we cannot be so quick to jump. This is, after all, Knights of Last Call. We could never do anything that simple. So there's a little bit of a twist on that there tonight. And we'll get into that there in a second. Just want to say a quick shout out and hello to everybody. We got Zolgathor here. Charix, Ben is standing by, but maybe not going to be hopping in as much. But cheers, Ben. We've got Stephen Palmer and Golarian in depth in the house. Heroes in our Knights of Last Call Patreon and YouTube sponsors as they have joined the adventure. That's why they got those sexy green names and those cool loyalty badges next to their names. KC is here. Frosty and Frost Raven are here, which is pretty cool. Neovi, Josh, we got Lazarus Dark here, Boothby, Rivo Grimm, who, by the way, is keeping strong from Puerto Rico. Want to give a big shout out to Rivo Grimm. Says, hello, gents. The phone can't handle the bandwidth during the live stream, so just want to jump in early and give my support. I will catch the vid when it posts. Stay frosty, nice. Well, you take care of yourself and all your friends, family, and community down there in Puerto Rico, Rivo. Of course, we're thinking about you. We got SC Voldo in the chat. SC Voldo, longtime friend of the Knights, been playing a Dwarf Cleric in our Friday night personal game. Welcome to the stream, sir. Frost Raven says, Konbanwa, Derek Sama. Well, a good evening to you as well there, Frost Raven. Welcome. So, what was I talking about? Oh, yeah, I was talking about all classes ranked. So here's the deal. People have been asking us to do this for a long time, and when the Knights of Last Call Patreon first started, a couple of us got together and we sort of spitballed some idea. And of course, between now and then, we've learned a lot more. I'm happy to say that some of our initial approaches or takes on a lot of the classes kind of remain the same. There's also obviously 4 or even maybe 6 new classes that have come out just in the last, year or so, 15 months since we basically initially did that list. So we had to kind of go back to the drawing board on that. But we've also been pleasantly surprised at some changes. Some classes have gotten better in our approximation. Some classes have gotten worse. And it should come as no surprise that for a lot of the classes, particularly the spellcasting classes, our valuation of those classes has changed as a result of our all spells ranked process. Because again, those all spells ranked videos really put a spotlight on the power of the 4 primary spellcasting traditions, and many classes are innately and inextricably tied to those spellcasting traditions. And if you're a primary spellcaster, a lot of your class's oomph is caught up in that spellcasting tradition. So that is something to keep in mind there as well. And then lastly, one of the things that I've learned the most, really just this year in 2022, as I played through Rise of the Rune Lords, and especially as I played as a player in Mr. Smith's campaign 1-20, is the realization that Pathfinder 2 does change a bit as you go from the low levels to the mid levels to the high levels. And so, when you are in the low levels, there are different problems that you're facing. There's different tactics. There's different strategies that you're using. And when you're in the high level, there are different strategies and tactics that you're using. A great example of this is aid. The aid action is almost useless, I would say, in the low levels of the game. The DC 20 is fairly hard to get. Getting a critical hit for +2 is tough, because then you need a 30, and the difference between trained and expert is nothing. It's just a +1/+2 on the crit. It's not until you start getting people, as you get past 7 and up until, like, you know, your 8, 9, 10, where people reasonably, you know, their master with a +5 and an item bonus, suddenly they have like a +21 or +22 to their skill check, basically being able to reasonably and regularly get that critical effect for a whopping +3 circumstance bonus. And then by the time you are into the high tier of the game, at especially 15+, when people start becoming legendary in skills, then you're auto passing for +4, and that's a very different style and component to the game. Proficiency levels, scaling, all of these things really mean that we need to look at these classes through 3 different lenses, and that is what we've decided to do here today. So we have our low level, which is 1 to 7. We have our mid level, which could be 8 to 13, and then we're gonna have our high level, which is 14 to 20. Some of the classes may not change a lot, but I think some of the classes will. And I think this is also important. And again, it's nice to last call. This is what we do. I think this is important for a couple of reasons and things that you need to take into consideration. For starters, and I want to be very clear with this. These rankings are based off of the power and effectiveness of these character classes in what I'm going to call a standard Pathfinder 2 campaign. And when I say standard Pathfinder 2 campaign, I mean, number 1, the type of campaign that is running a Paizo adventure path or a Paizo-based adventure. These are what most people out there are playing. And even the people that aren't playing Paizo-based adventure paths are playing adventures that probably end up looking a lot like Paizo-based adventure path. And what does that mean? It means combat. It means a lot of combat. Am I saying that it's 90% combat? No, but I'm saying it's probably at least 75% plus, at least in terms of encounters. Keep in mind that if, you know, if you spend an entire session, you know, just role-playing and acting in character, and there's minimal dice rolls, well, then it doesn't even matter what system you're playing, let alone what class you're playing. So that has absolutely no bearing to anything whatsoever. What we're really talking about are classes' abilities to handle the mechanical challenges that the game system and vis-a-vis the game master are throwing at you and your party. So what are those challenges in a Pathfinder 2 game? Well, I am stipulating, or I'm stating, that I believe that the vast majority of it is combat. Furthermore, combat is the type of situation where you need mechanical power and strength, because failure in combat is usually the only situation where you are going to get yourself in trouble and create deaths and possibly TPKs. Don't get me wrong. There are important skill checks to be made in the course of these adventures. But oftentimes, a skill check, and even failing a skill check, is not going to be nearly as critical or as important as succeeding at a combat, because failing at a combat oftentimes means major consequences, either for the adventure, the storyline, your characters' lives, hell, the whole campaign itself. TPKs are still probably the number 2 campaign killer, right below the burnout and the group fizzling and fading away. So those are my criteria. Now, again, in your game, things might be different, and we'll talk a little bit about that, particularly with some of the stronger classes and with some of the weaker classes, because I do think that that is something to take into consideration. You know your group better than I ever can and will. But that being said, from what we've seen from Pathfinder 2, we can expect that there is a fair amount of focus and emphasis on combat. We kind of understand what the basic adventuring day looks like for a Paizo adventure. Most of these dungeon maps are not particularly long. Most of these dungeon maps, most of these dungeon rooms and encounters are fairly contained. We make fun of the size of Paizo adventure maps on this all the time. But furthermore, you know, that is a reality. And most of these things are pretty small. A lot of times there's plenty of encounters in these adventure paths where you might only go 1, 2, maybe 3 encounters per day before you get an opportunity to do a long rest. So we're kind of taking that as our baseline. And I think it's worth something we can talk about it as these things come up. You know, furthermore, combat is usually the one place, no matter what your group is, where the mechanics and the rules take hold the most. Meaning, if we are playing, you could be playing in a campaign and the group needs to convince the local mayor to let them leave town. Well, there's plenty of GMs who are just going to role play that out, and they're just going to talk it out, and the players are going to give a compelling reason or use a piece of evidence or information that they gained earlier in the adventure, and the GM is just going to say, yeah, that's great, the mayor agrees with you and lets you through. So there's a lot of situations there where the mechanics don't even matter. Now, there are GMs who are going to call for a roll, but okay, now we're talking again. A lot of times in these adventures, when the adventure kind of hinges on a single roll of a skill check, if the PCs fail, a lot of times the GMs will go, well, he thinks about it for a moment and he says, well, do you have any other ideas? And he's basically saying, roll again till you succeed. He really is saying that. And the reason why they're doing that is because your DM, she can't, a lot of times the adventurers get stuck up on these bottlenecks of these skill checks. So while I am saying that skill checks and exploration-based activity is important, the consequences, the severity is not as critical. And as such, whether your character is really strong in that area or really weak in that area doesn't have as much of an influence or impact on the potential consequences of failure as it would in combat. Okay, so those are our sort of our baseline assumptions. Lastly, we're starting with low level. Why? Well, low level, 1 to 7, because it goes in order. But also, realistically, this is going to be most of your campaigns, people. I'm sorry to say it. Most campaigns start at level 1. There's a couple adventure paths out there that only go to level 10. But the sad truth is, a lot of campaigns fizzle out and die before you get to the high levels, sometimes even before you get to the medium levels. And so, while it is fun to plan your character to be like, well, they're gonna kind of suck, but at level 16, it'll all come together. But you probably won't get to level 16. I mean, that's just, I've been playing this game for close to 30 years, and that's just the sad truth and reality of it. Speaking of 30 years, Saturday, September 24th, is my birthday. It is my 40th birthday. Oh my God, I want to die. We might do a Saturday night birthday stream. We'll see how we're feeling. I don't think I really have a lot of plans, but I just want to say, as I approach my end of my 4th decade of life, thank you for being on this journey with me. It's been a really interesting set of circumstances that I found myself in. I'm very blessed to have such a receptive and generous and well-behaved audience as you all, and I appreciate all your comments and your concerns, even your criticisms. For the most part, they are all very well-meaning and well-intentioned, so I think that's pretty important. Okay, lastly, we have a bit of a strange tip goal tonight. If we get $150, the chat will get to vote and pick my new glasses. You see, these were my backup glasses, which I've been wearing for like 2.5 years in the pandemic, and they finally got a wicked scratch on them. I really need to get new glasses. So I was going to order some new glasses, but I thought, you know what, YOLO, if we hit the tip goal tonight, we'll let the chat pick it and we'll put it into a vote, and we'll let the chat pick which glasses I get next. For funsy. Frost Raven says, I'm 41. I know the burn of existential crisis. After 30 years, RPG campaigns don't go past 9 to 12th level. That's true. Yes. I mean, that is just the way it is. You're going to play a lot. You could die. That also happens. I mean, and also too, that's when you're your most fragile and frail, is when you're, a young character. All right. Here we go. All right, so because we don't have to go through 100 spells, I just decided to use Tier Maker for this. It's a little bit easier for us. Keep in mind, by the way, if you want to show your support for the channel, feel free to tip. You can find a link to our Stream Elements tip in the link below, or the doobly-doo below. You could also type !tip, and that'll give you information about that. You can also leave us a super chat. Those are all appreciated. All of those will attack the current hype boss, who is over there in the upper right-hand corner of your screen. That's currently Steven from last stream. You take him out, and you'll be the new hype boss. So how about that? Pretty cool, huh? Anyways, well, let's get into this, shall we? By the way, I will try to read chat. I will try to keep up with it. But if you really want to say something, let me know, and we'll get it in there. Boothby coming in.
He tipped $30. Happy birthday. Buy yourself something pretty. We'll have to catch up on the VODs after vacation.
Sounds good, Boothby. I'm jealous of your upcoming vacation. Thank you very much for the tip. Definitely look forward to discussing this with you. Boothby and his friends are going on a camping / gaming / getaway retreat week. I think it's a whole week. Boothby was sharing with us the meal plan. This person's taking. He thought of everything. Really jealous. It's a brilliant idea. We'd love to do that, something like that someday, and call it NightCon. But instead of doing it with our, 6 or 7 close personal friends, we'll do it with our brand new, 100+ new friends that we've made. So, Boothby, thank you for that tip and appreciate it. Welcome to the hype, boss. Okay, so let's get into this. All right. Well, we're gonna start off, I think, with probably the easiest thing, which is going to be the fighter. Well, before we get into this, let's talk a little bit about these tiering structures. Okay. If you're familiar with our all spells ranked, this is very similar. I think it's important that we talk about these as well. Okay. S tier means that this class, in my opinion, is too good. This class creates problems in the space, the design space, for other character classes.
Lazarus Dark.
Thanks, Lazarus.
$3. Last month was my 41st. Best birthday of my life, because I got the beginner box and learned to GM for the first time.
Very nice.
My TTRPG journey is only just begun, so I'm happy to find out you can teach old dogs new tricks.
Thank you, Lazarus Dark. Well, I appreciate it. I got to admit, I'm feeling better going into 40 than I did going into 30. And so I appreciate I appreciate that. So that's very awesome. And happy birthday to us all as we approach our new decade of life. Thank you, Laz. Appreciate it so much. Okay, so S tier to me means that this character class has too much versatility, strength. It eats up too much of the design space to the detriment potentially of other character classes. Okay, so while S tier is, quote, real good, it's also almost too good. And it really is too good. And it creates problems for other character classes in that space. All right. A tier classes I consider to be fun, effective, powerful. Now, again, we're just talking about the power level here. And so when I talk about power level, I'm really talking about two things. One, the math is tight in Pathfinder 2. That means that these characters have the numerical guts to compete with other opponents or GM-based DCs by level to compete, to be able to land hits and land critical hits, or to land successes and land critical successes. That's what you want in this game. We did a video called Missing is Not Fun. It doesn't matter how cool your thing is. If you miss, it sucks. So you want to hit. And so you need to have the chops, the math. Same thing with saving throws. Same thing with perception. Same thing with skills. All of these things combine mechanically to make your character very potent and strong. But this game is not simple. Pathfinder 2, role-playing games in general are not simple. Pathfinder 2 is definitely not simple. And so having the ability to have some versatility, to have some horizontal growth, to be able to do several different things is also something that can factor into your character's power level. Now, that's a tricky subject and we can get into it, but I think it bears in mind that versatility is worth something. And lastly, there's fun. That does not factor into this, and it's something we'll talk about. But just because a class is powerful does not mean that it is fun. And just because a class is really weak does not mean that it is not fun. So, if you're like, I've been having a lot of fun with my blank class, well, that's probably that's very, very valid. I'm not trying to say that your experience is invalid, but I am trying to say that per the math of the game and the way that the game is structured, your character class is pretty weak. All right. So no surprises here. We go to fighter. Fighter is S tier. We all know this. If you've been online for any amount of time, you know that the fighter creates problems with archetypes because a fighter archetyping into another class is usually a better version of that class than the class by itself. Very strong, single attribute dependent. Most fighters are strength based, but they can be dex based. Best attack bonus in the game, barring the Gunslinger, but the Gunslinger pays a heavy price for that, being very, 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 very focused. The fighter ends up being remarkably better at everything. And in a game where hitting is fun and critting is even better, the fighter just does it better than everyone. It also should be pointed out that against a character or against lower level foes, power doesn't matter as much because, you know, you have such a big advantage. But when you're fighting a higher level foe, someone like a fighter, you know, if there's a creature where you crit on a 20, that means that a fighter crits on an 18, 19, or 20. That means that they are critting 3 times as much as the other characters in the party. Triple the critical hit percentage chance. It's huge. And we all know how powerful critical hits can be in this game because of the doubling damage and stacking effects of critical specialization that come in at level 5, yada, yada, yada. In addition, the fighter has a really great array of the rest. It has, by 3rd level, it's an expert in all 3 saves. It starts as an expert in perception. The fighter gets great armor, great hit points. The fighter doesn't have any action economy issues. In fact, the fighter gains a lot of feats that, you know, when most of these classes usually have to, you know, we're usually dealing with 2 things in Pathfinder 2, right? Which is multiple attack penalty and action economy. So a lot of times, you know, a second attack is great, but you have to pay, you know, you pay for it with a map attack. But hey, here's a feat or a feature that lets you deal with your multiple attack penalty. Or hey, here's this really cool thing that you can do. It's kind of a pain in the butt, but it costs a lot of actions. Fighters don't have any of those things. Fighters don't have to rage, don't have to hunt prey, don't have to enter a stance. Fighters don't have to spell strike and recharge. Fighters just get to be good at what they do, and they don't pay a price for it at all. In addition, their feat selection is really, really great. Now, we haven't even gotten into this because this is mid-tier. We're just talking levels 1 to 7 here, but eventually fighters even get bonus class feats. Their feats are really, really good. If you're a fighter and you're doing traditional archetyping, you're going to have a hard time doing it because you're going to look at those feats and say, I don't want to give any of these up. They are all really strong and really compelling. And, you know, right from the get-go, they just get so many different options. And lastly, which I don't think gets talked enough about, fighters do not have a subclass. You know, that's what they call them in 5e. But a lot of classes in Pathfinder 2, basically at level 1, you have to pick, you know, a racket or a patron or something that kind of, or a bloodline. It's just something that prices you in, and it a lot of times is to the exclusion of other abilities, exclusion of feats. You'll look at your, you know, you'll gain a level and say, wow, cool. There's 6 feats available to me. And then you look and you say, okay, but 3 of them are for different subclasses that I don't check. So really, I'm only picking between 3. Fighters aren't like that. Now, yes, a lot of the fighter feats kind of follow trees of 2-handed, 1-handed with an open hand, you know, dual wielding. But there's nothing that prevents a fighter from dabbling in both. They're not specialized in that way. So in a game that's focused around combat, the fighter just reigns supreme. And that is our S tier class. For sure. All right. Let's talk about the Barbarian. All right. The Barbarian is going to get put, I think, to B tier. And here's why. The Barbarian, it has some very reasonably strong saves. They're not as good as the fighter. You know, especially though, because the Barbarian's a little bit weaker in ref, but in my personal opinion, reflex is probably the least scary of all the saves. Usually reflex saves just have to deal with like taking half damage or full damage from AoEs, whereas fort and will saves are really, really, you know, the ones that can kind of shut you out. Frightened and fleeing or slowed or something like that, which are really gross. Barbarian is typically one of the most sad classes. Oh, for people who are new to this, by the way, when I say that a class is sad, I'm saying that it has a single attribute dependency. That means that a class only really relies on having a really high stat in one stat. If we say that a class is MAD, M-A-D, that stands for multiple attribute dependency, which means that the class kind of needs to have a good this stat and a good this stat and maybe a good that stat. And that can really eat you up because you only, you know, the game is balanced and you only have so many points to go around. You only have so many ability boosts to go around. I will say that in Pathfinder 2, MAD classes is like a preview, sneak preview. a mad class gets better as you get to higher tiers. Because in Pathfinder 2, by the time you get into your third set of ability boosts at level 15, like almost like all of your ability scores can easily be like a 16 or an 18 for the most part, maybe except for like 1 or 2. And so a lot of those low ability scores that you really kind of wanted to be high, you can kind of bring up as you get higher into the game. But at the early levels, when you have like no, you know, you're just on your initial set of ability boosts and you get your first set at 5, it could be pretty tough to be multiple attribute dependent or mad. But Barbarians, they just need a strength. They just need a really high strength, 18 strength, 16 con. You're probably good with that. Like a 12 or 14 dex, and you're just good. You're just good. You don't really care about int. If you have some wisdom, you put it there just to help out your will save. Charisma probably doesn't matter as much either, unless you want to intimidate. You get some options, but the point is, you could put something into your strength, and you can't really care. So yeah, so the Barbarian is pretty good, but the issue with the Barbarian is that. But the issue of the Barbarian is that, number one, they are very much a one-trick pony, that is a big thing to consider with them. Number two, and again, this is very common. The fighter doesn't have this, but that's why they're S tier. The Barbarian has an action economy issue, which is they have to rage. Okay, and rage has a downside. It's -1 to your AC, and in this game that means a lot. Now, don't get me wrong; they get 12 hit points. It's pretty good. You get a little bit of damage reduction later on, but they do get hit a lot, and depending on what your instinct is, it could be really bad. Bob in the chat was a giant instinct barbarian. They get a -2 because they're clumsy, and then they rage. You're going to do a lot of damage, but that's about it. You're going to be striking a lot as a barbarian, and you're going to usually be fairly reliant on melee. Barbarians' class feats are, while good, are sometimes limited by the instincts that are available to them, and so a lot of your class feats are sort of priced out to you. And lastly, you're going to basically have to burn or eat an action especially at low levels, like we're talking here, at the beginning of every fight to rage. A lot of your class feats have the rage trait. They don't even work if you're not raging. Ultimately, as a melee character in Pathfinder 2, it is hard to rank barbarians, anything below a B. But because of their single focus, because of their rage using up and eating up an action, and because of an associated penalty just to even be able to activate and go into your class, we decided to put them at B. Now, again, we talked about this before. If S is broken and A is top tier, B is a good, solid, reliable class. There's nothing wrong with a B. A C is totally reasonable and playable. It's not going to be the strongest class at your table. It's not going to be the weakest class at your table. A C class it works, it functions, it just doesn't really have a lot of pizzazz. The Barbarian is above that because I respect the fact that they have some pretty good saves and they can do a lot of damage. They really do hit for a lot. Now, a D class, in my opinion, is a class that is going to struggle to play. A D class does not have the requirements to... It either has mathematical issues or it has flaws that prevent the class from functioning optimally. You're going to miss a lot, or creatures are going to save a lot against your abilities. You might have a problem feeling like you're doing anything. And yes, you could maybe say, well, I won't do things then. I'll just be a support style character, which is reasonable. But at low level, support style characters tend to be pretty underwhelming. And we'll get into that in a second. Oh, an F tier class, that just means that your class, in my opinion, does not function. It's essentially broken because of a combination of mechanics and problems in the game. All right, what do we got next? Just put it in chat. We'll shout it out. What do we got? Also, yeah, best offense makes the best defense. Henry's not wrong. The best condition is dead, and if the enemy is destroyed and killed, well, then guess what? You're preventing a lot of damage. Yeah, if you're I'll let the chat maybe shout out what classes we should cover next. But in the meantime, I will take a look here at, I'm just trying to think which ones I think will be fun to go in. I mean, we could just go in order, but Bob says Alchemist. All right, well, fine. We'll do the Alchemist. All right, we'll do Alchemist, and then we'll do Rogue, Gid. All right, so the Alchemist, I have to give an F tier too. Okay? I don't. Okay, now this is low level. Spoiler alert. I think the Alchemist gets better at higher levels. Okay? Here is why I feel that the Alchemist does not function in the game. Number one, they have options available to them, which make them into combatants, things like the bomber and such. But their weapon proficiency lags and does not improve. They are an extremely mad class with a key ability score of int, but typically finding themselves needing strength for a mutagenous build or dex for a throwing build. Their armor can struggle, so you need some dex there as well. Their saves are fine, but they have poor perception. At low level, they are extremely limited in the number of alchemical items that they can have. They do not get cantrips like spellcasters do. And so for the first couple of levels, they are really limited, especially if you're something like a bomber. The ability bonuses are underwhelming at best. They're reliant upon a class DC, which often in this entire phase of the game is stuck at trained. Even at level 7, a lot of their feat choices are feat taxes. People talk about things like calculated splash, far lobber, I'm trying to remember the one, quick draw or quick lobber. That's just a function, right? These things should have been part of the chassis of the class. Also, in conversations that we've had on this channel with Mark Seifter, talking about how consumables were sort of broken in Pathfinder 2 and needed to be fixed and changed, and there was a lot of feedback because of the way that they originally wanted to do consumables. And this is the reason why, by the way, alchemical items and consumables are also messed up in the order of books in the back of the CRB. I think the Alchemist was suffered because of the sudden realization of the problems that they were going to have with consumable items. And because alchemical items and consumable items, in my opinion, are flawed, and the Alchemist is a class literally built on those items, I just don't think it functions. I get it. Look, it has hit points and it has skills and it has abilities and it has some number of proficiency bonuses. Yes, the character class can work in Pathfinder 2. But I honestly think that without some significant house rules, you are at a significant disadvantage. I won't talk about the fun factor because for some people it could be a really, really fun class, and I appreciate that. But there's just a lot of fundamental issues with consumables in the game, and then this class that's built around consumables as well. And then worse than that, I get where some classes need to specialize, but as a Alchemist, I don't want the Alchemist to specialize. Like, if you're a mutagenist, it's like you now really just suck at throwing bombs. You can, but you're just horrible. Your dex is going to be bad, and your bomb proficiency is low. You're never going to hit. You're going to miss and do 1 damage. Now, again, at higher levels, I think they gain a little bit of advantage. They get a lot of infusions. Creatures tend to have a lot more weaknesses, etc., etc. There can be better things to do. But at low level, between having... by the way, spellcasting classes are going to get dinged at low level as well, just because you don't have a lot of resources, okay? So ultimately, I think that for a lot of the reasons that are being brought up into the chat, because of things like Quick Bomber and Far Lobber from Henry should be automatic, or at least tied into the Bomber subclass, or items should scale with class DC, and all these other things. And now in some cases, you can fix these like with poisons with a feat, but why do I have to take a feat to do this? So the reason why alchemical items are flawed fundamentally, Ryan, is because for their level, they're just too weak. They don't provide enough bang for your buck, and having a class based around them is, I think, problematic. A lot of the durations are problematic. Mutagens give you a penalty, and that's your ability is to give someone a buff and a penalty. That's not like it. You're using your resources and your spells to give someone. Show me a caster spell which buffs you and penalizes you. You won't find many, maybe at all. And so yeah. So again, I agree. By the way, in this road to level 7, level 3 is a good level for the Alchemist because you do get your moderate versions of your bombs. It's a nice little boost in damage, and it can do a little bit better. I also think that Nemo is correct. For those of you saying D, what would it take to earn an F? Remember, this is our scale here, folks, people. You know, I'm not saying that someone has to be at the bottom, but I'm telling you, the Alchemist and the number of times that people have house ruled it, the number of times that GMs have house ruled it, the fact that Paizo had to come out and fix it just to even make it playable, to me, I just don't think the class functions. Also, some of its subclasses, just quite frankly, I think don't even work. I mean, when the Alchemist came out, it couldn't even hold all of its equipment. That's how fundamentally flawed it was. It needed more time in the oven. It needed more time to cook. It just didn't get there. It just didn't get there. All right. Someone said Bard. Austin says something that literally doesn't function. Even if Alchemist is bad, it still functions. I mean, by your definition, there could be a character that only gets trained proficiency all the way to level 20. Guess what? They get no class features and they get no class abilities. But guess what? They can still strike. They can still make untrained skill checks. They still function in Pathfinder 2. That's not a valid. That's kind of a very straw man argument. In a game that is as tightly balanced as Pathfinder 2, the Alchemist gets an F. You know, just because you put words on the page doesn't mean you get a D. Ask my OChem professor from college that. All right. Somebody said Bard. All right. This represented a big change for me. When I came to Pathfinder 2, I thought the Bard was weak. I thought Occult was weak. But Bob said, I thought you were doing Rogue. Oh, that's right. I did say Rogue. Okay, sorry. Rogue. All right. Rogue. A class I don't like. A. Rogues, like the fighter, get great saves. By level 7, they are expert, and they've got expert plus in reflex, meaning they kind of basically turn a save into a critical save on their lightning reflexes, their evasion. They have amazing perception. They get a skill proficiency, a skill feat per level. They get a large number of skills. They're mostly single attribute dependency. Usually it's dex. They have very, very, very strong class features. Their shtick is, I have to do combat. Now, let's contrast this with the Barbarian. The Rogue is, I want to sneak attack. My target needs to be flat-footed. Well, number one, the Rogue gets a couple of ways to kind of just do that automatically, but there's a lot of ways to make people flat-footed in the game, including flanking, meaning the Rogue isn't having to pay any actions to get to do their cool thing. They just have to move. And when they move they just move to the other side. And then once the opponent is flawed, now don't get me wrong, it's not 100%. Not every attack you make in the whole game will be a sneak attack, but the Rogue gets to do their thing and doesn't have to pay for it. The only thing you have to do is remember that when you move into melee, to just make sure you're on the other side of them. I think the Rogue is very powerful. It has some very strong class features. A lot of its rackets are very compelling. They can give you different options depending on the play style of your game. And, this is another place where I came around. Like, I think even at higher levels, the Rogue could be potentially S tier. Just because of their just dominance in this space. They are super strong, very, very, very reliable. Swiss stack, Rogues do it from behind. Yeah, exactly. Fighters fight, Rogues do it from behind. Honestly, Rogue is probably more like, again, it could be an S later on. Very impressed with the Rogue. Just great saves, great perception, all the skill training. It should go without saying that in the early levels of the game, the ones we're talking about right now, medicine is very important. Treat wounds, very important. The Rogues can get to expert in medicine before everybody else. Aside from they can also get to ward medic and continual recovery before anybody else. And so in some cases, your Rogue becomes, for the first couple of levels of the game, until maybe some of those focus spells get put online, they can honestly be one of the best healers, at least out of combat healers, in the group, in the party. And that's really, really cool. Usually the Rogue is going to have a great dex. They might even have a good wisdom to help with their perception. So again, their saves can oftentimes be astronomical, even at these low levels. They get, this isn't 3rd edition. This isn't Pathfinder 1 where the Rogues fell behind. Nope, they get critical spec. They get expert weapon proficiency at 5, just like the rest of the melee, just like the rest of the martials. So they get all this martial capability, and at the same time, they get in some incredible abilities and skill focus. I think it's a really, really, really great class. A solid, really awesome class. And very versatile. So this is what I talked about, where, on paper, the rogue and the barbarian, probably does more damage than the rogue, but the rogue has just so much more versatility that it just shines. And I've been really impressed with what rogues have been able to do in Pathfinder 2. And so I give it the A, I give it a salute begrudgingly, because again, I don't think that initially I would have said that I really liked the class. Corey C. also bringing up a great point, by the way, about the Alchemist. This is kind of what I was referring to when I talked about the way that they restructured things and the Alchemist kind of got left holding the bag. Originally, my understanding is that consumables were supposed to be more, stronger, and they had abilities for people to limit them because they didn't want you to be able to like spam, basically cure light wounds wand spam. But then people hated that; it was too gamist, not simulationist enough. They removed that, and we kind of got what the consumables that we did get, and the Alchemist kind of got left holding that bag. So, it's unfortunate, but that's the case. All right, what was the next one? That's all right, Unfortunate Pumpkin. You'll get caught up. All right, let's see. Galarian in Depth said Rogue. Okay, I did see a Bard. Okay, Bard is next. Thanks, Bob. All right, Bard. So this is what I was saying before. Bard, I came in. Bard has always struggled in my game, in my world, because they're this weird, like, shouldn't the Bard just be multi-class? Isn't that what a multi-class character is? And I was unimpressed with the occult spell list. But thanks, Bob, for the Northern Reaches stats. I do appreciate that. So we got 10 bards out of 124 characters in Northern Reaches. So we got a little bit under 10% bardage. Remember, there's 22 classes, so on average, should be about 4%. Granted, some of them are pretty new. But yeah, so the bard. Well, number one, going through the all spells ranked has shown me the strength and power of the occult spell list. The flavor of the bard, we'll leave that aside for a moment. Who the hell knows what's going on with the occult spell list and the bard, and they get melee, they get weapon proficiencies, but they're a spellcaster. Who knows what's going on there? But here we are at low level. The bard does get access to a couple of martial weapons. And as such, at low level, at least up until level 5, everybody's just trained. So your bard might not even be that bad, because at least they get a martial weapon. They're kind of like the war priest in that regard. Whereas, but I mean, obviously the war priest does get expert. But the occult spell list has really impressed me. Number 2, it was our number 2 best list in terms of overall strength and power. But what really, I think, cements the bard as an A-tier class is, Brothleth got it right, it's the focus cantrips, it's the composition cantrips. Inspire Courage is probably the single greatest, best first level feat in the game, aside from, I don't know, maybe Double Slice or something, maybe Sudden Charge, I don't know. But it is incredibly powerful. It is something that only they can do. And it's just incredibly powerful. Yeah, Inspire Courage. Steven, you might be right. Without Inspire Courage, the bard honestly might be like B tier, right? So it's incredible. It's really, really powerful. They get some really great focus spells. They get some incredible cantrip spells that only they get. Of course, access to Magic Missile and just a million other things. You do get a little bit of limitation from your you have to choose a muse, and that can limit what feats you get. But the bard feats are pretty exciting. And you look through your class feats and you think, wow, I'd love that composition kind. I'd love Allegro, and I'd love Triple Time, and I'd love all of these. And it's really, really, really powerful. And so it's just really, really great. And of course, later on you get Inspire Defense, which is there's only 2 spells in the game that can boost your armor class by more than 1 point using a status bonus. One of them is Divine Aura, which is a level 8 divine spell from the Divine tradition. And the other one is Inspire Defense. So that's obviously later on. That doesn't technically factor into this, but Inspire Courage is enough. So yeah, it's just a great class. I love that BH. Bard is a class that wants you to take Archetype Bard just so you can get more feats from Bard. 100%. I don't know if that's legal, but I totally get it. Bard has great class list. It's fun. Your occult spell list is going to allow you to do it, and you're a full caster, and you're just going to be able to kick ass and take names. Spontaneous casting is very powerful in Pathfinder 2. It was supposed to be weaker in Pathfinder 1. I don't know if they did this on purpose, but the way that things shake out in Pathfinder 2 and the way that your spell repertoire and your signature spells work out and the way that scaling spells in particular works out, a lot of times, and the way incapacitation and all this other stuff with heightening works out, a lot of times it feels kind of like spontaneous spells can almost be stronger than prepared spells. So overall, fantastic class, great power, comes great responsibility. That's our Bard. All right, champion. Bob, what's this? I don't know if we had one that was next, but I'm gonna do the champion really quick. Okay, so we got the champion. All right, champion. We had some pretty reasonable debates here. I want to give a quick shout out to Strat and Vin, who I sat up with last night, and we kind of finalized this list. Champion is a strange class for me because it has obviously incredible armor. At level 7, they get expert in armor. First class to do so. Obviously, they're in heavy. So champion's very strong. They've got pretty good saves. Now, they do have anathema. They do have restrictions. Those are real. I mean, unless you're playing the most absolute basic horrible adventure, like board gamey role-playing game of all time, they do get a restriction in the form of their anathema, their tenets, their causes, their pledges. I think that is a real thing. Now, I will say, as Bob says in here, the problem with the champion is really two things: high armor and their reaction. Okay, high armor and their reaction. I hate to say it, but that's about it. Now, I'm giving them a B, and I think that's generous because their class reaction, their champion reaction is very strong. Lay on hands is a good focus spell. Their heavy armor is very, very nice. But man, their class feats suck. In fact, champion might have the worst class feats at low level in the game. Some of the level 14 and 16 and 20, those class feats are awesome. But man, the level 1, 2, 4, and you get lay on hands at the 1 level, but like litanies, they suck. The smites suck. And a lot of their reactions, or a lot of their class feats give you a new reaction, which is the dumbest thing ever because that's what your class is. It's a reaction. So also at higher levels, the reaction falls off a little bit because of the 15-foot range. I mean, for example, at higher levels, if you and your champion ally are flanking a huge creature, you can't even use the reaction on your ally. It's too far away. So I think they needed to give them more damage output. This is the biggest problem with the lawful good redemption or whatever reaction is. The attack of opportunity from a champion is laughable. It's laughable. They have a really high armor class, but nothing should ever really attack them because they don't really have any damage prevention. So it just really doesn't come out. Really, honestly, champions are all about lay on hands and that really great reaction. And at low level, taking 7 or 8 points of damage off every round, really, really, really huge. And so while they do not, in some ways, they are like the antithesis of the Barbarian, right? They're both so good at what they do that they go up from C tier to B tier. The Barbarian is just this one trick offensive pony, but they're so good at it, they get the B. The champion is just this like ultra defensive protector class that kind of really doesn't do much else, but it's so good at it that it gets the B tier. And I think that's just really great. And even though it's right at the end of this, at the tier here of 7, going to expert early in your armor, which is already heavy, you're probably in full plate by that point with a +1. I think you should be at +1 armor at level 5 or something, or 6, maybe it's 7, I don't know. But either way, your armor class at level 7 is just, if you have a shield, is just through the roof. So I do think going the shield route with the shield block is kind of a flaw though, because you don't want to use your reaction. Escanor, Nick, when he played Escanor on our Rise of the Runelords game, he struggled with this a lot. He was really specialized in his shield. He loved his shield. But if you use your reaction to shield block, then you're not using your reaction to, do your champion's reaction, which can be a problem. And Brothlith, yes, the archetype, the reaction does not scale in range, and that is a big problem. But that's not a problem at these levels. When the rooms are fairly small, most of the monsters are medium-sized, maybe large. So the champion, it gets a solid B. Very, very fun. Yeah, Corey, 100%. At higher levels, you do get more reactions, and that's great. But at low levels, you're stuck with just one. So yeah, good class, but hampered by what I think is a lack of offensive capability and horrible class feats. Not to mention, by the way, that the Paladin champion class feats are some of the most restrictive in the game. Like here, you get to a new level and there might be 5 class feats written in the book, and you literally might only qualify for one of them because one is for a tenet that, tenet of evil. Well, okay, I'm not evil. Okay, one is for the chaotic good. One is for the neutral good. Okay, here's the one for me. And that's it. So, that's a huge deal. All right, we're going to do Witch, and then we're going to do Investigator. Okay. Witch. Witch gets a D. Okay. Couple things. Number one, spellcasters in general, I think, are weaker at the early levels of the game. They don't get a lot of spells, and that's what their characters do. And that does stink. That does suck. It is so there's that. Now the Witch has a couple of traditions. One of them is arcane, but the rest of them are different traditions depending on what patron you choose. And again, there are problems with some of those other traditions. They can be weaker. They're very similar to the Wizard, but instead of getting like drain bonded item and getting extra spell slots per day, or like choosing a cool class feature, you just get a familiar. Familiars are cool, but for other classes, that's just like a feat that you can take. Like, it's kind of just like a worst. It's kind of a worse wizard. You don't get the drain bonded item. You don't get the cool ability to get hexes. I just don't think the hexes are very good. Sorry. It's just a disappointing class. Yeah. So, I see a lot of people agreeing here in the chat. Hex cantrips are pretty underwhelming. Arcane Witch is okay, but you're just a weak sorcerer. Nemo says just a worse wizard. Now, again, also, I got to be honest with you. You just... does the class function? Yes. I just think that if you want to be doing this thing, I think honestly you could just kind of be a wizard and just take a familiar feat and, I don't know, focus on enchantment and charm as your school. And I feel like you'll be a more effective mechanical witch, even though your class isn't a witch. This is one of those things that should have been an archetype. Should not have been a class. It should have just been an archetype. I agree, Steven. Even though witches familiars get extra powers and they can have extra familiar abilities above and beyond what a normal familiar can have, familiars just, look, they don't even give the damn thing stats in the game. Like, they're kind of an afterthought. Like, they're not very good in Pathfinder 2. So, and a lot of the witch's power seems to be put into those things. Just a very underwhelming class. Ryan, I am not 100% familiar with all of the hexes, but I do know that Clinging Ice, yes, is a reasonable one. But again, it's just kind of a weaker wizard with less access to spells and spell-like abilities and very focused and potentially underwhelming hex cantrips. So, Brothless, but a witch can summon, resummon, and are familiar with only 1 day of downtime instead of 7 days. OP ability for sure. Oh, there we go, Bob. So this is interesting. Now, remember, like I said, obviously we have some new, we'll just say that, Bob, give me the percentage. Bob, give me the percentage. We know that there are some new classes. So before Thaumaturge and Psychic came out, there were 20 classes. So if everything was distributed equally, you would expect to see 5% of a class in our Northern Reaches group, right? Roughly, because of 20 classes. And so 3 out of, that's not a percentage, Bob. Thanks, Bob. You're gonna make me do it? Okay, Bob. It's like, what is it, like 2%? Thank you. Okay, wow, my math. So there you go. So the witch definitely underwhelmed in our sample size as well. Okay. Next, investigator. Well, we go from 1D to another. Okay. The investigator is the rogue's witch. All right. They're very similar to the rogue, but their saves, their armor, and their perception are all slightly worse. They key off of intelligence, which really limits your offensive capability. Devise stratagem can eat up a ton of actions. Strategic strike is very limited because it's limited to devising stratagems, and it's the only time you can use your intelligence. And you oftentimes are going to have to make another check or another action just to be able to devise stratagems again. Methodologies and class feats are very, very niche and very, very campaign specific. And this is where I want to talk about this class. Perhaps no class is more polarizing, okay? Because if your campaign is a standard Pathfinder 2 campaign where you're going through an AP like Age of Ashes or, you know, Abomination Faults or anything like that, your investigator is probably going to be a D. But if your campaign is very, very focused on, you know, investigations and mysteries and a lot of tracking down clues, and it's very much like a, you know, the X-Files. If you were running like a very dark archive themed campaign, then I do think that the investigator's powers become much more useful and much more reasonable. The other thing which someone mentioned is, you know, if your investigator, if your GM lets you follow leads before entering a room, I agree, that is stronger. In fact, it's kind of similar to the ranger, where if a ranger can hunt their prey by tracking before the fight starts, that actually gives them a pretty significant action economy boost. But a lot of times in these games, maybe your game is different, but in most of the games that I've seen played, a lot of times you do not know what's in that next room. The first time you encounter, the first time when you kill the monster, that's the first time you've ever even encountered. Sometimes the first time you've even ever heard of that monster or that NPC existing. Bob says, devise a stratagem is the most wordy waste of time I've ever read. And so ultimately, I do think the campaign they're very campaign dependent. But in a standard campaign, again, I just feel like they're a worse rogue. And, you know, Brovleth says investigator is the beginning of a big problem with new classes. They're very action starved. I will also agree with that, Brovleth. And I talked my player out of playing an investigator for the fighter. And I also agree with KC. This is another class that just should have been an archetype. Why not have a proven character core chassis like fighter or rogue? Or fighter's probably too good, but any of those things. And then have an archetype of investigator that you can layer on top of it if you want some of those additional cool exploration, mystery, Scooby-Doo whodunit stuff without having to like also support structurally the underpinnings of an entire class, which is presumably expected to participate in a fairly combat heavy game. If your game is not combat heavy, aka your game is not like most Pathfinder 2 campaigns, adventure paths, adventures, or even homebrew, then it may be investigators for you. But if it is like any of those other things, you know, you may want to reconsider. All right. Someone said we should take out Inventor just to finish off the int classes. Inventor is not here. Oh no, here it is. Here it is. All right. I wanted the Inventor to be higher, but the powers that be and my allies who helped me put this together, ultimately we convinced it down to D because we felt like it was worse than the C classes. Now, the Inventor is an int-based class, which usually ends up needing Dex but oftentimes strength, but con as well. Because a lot of times the Inventor ends up being a melee type character, which means they need some hit points and they need some armor because their armor is only medium or light. And they need strength to be able to hit. And they're very multiple attribute dependent. Now, it's a really weird class. They have a crazy, weird array of feats. Overdrive eats an action just like Rage, but you have to make a check. It can potentially backfire. You can use some of your abilities, but they can blow up on you. It's a very, very wonky class. Okay, we're gonna have a bunch of re-ups on everybody becoming an adventurer. Thank you, everybody, for more months of support. Appreciate that. Seems like a lot of these post-CRB classes are mad. I agree. You know, it's tough. Corey C says, poor action economy, mad. Good damage if you can get your crafting check off. Corey C, we just finished a 20 level campaign with an Inventor. And you're absolutely right. When the Inventor could get their crafting check off, when they could get a crit on their overdrive, when they could hit with their gigaton strike because they were being aided by a fighter and they were under the effect of a true target, it was pretty powerful and effective. But ultimately, you know, their gadgets and gizmos are fun and flavorful, but a lot of times it's stuff that a cheap consumable item could do anyways. You know, oh, I have rocket boots. It's like, okay, yeah, well, we can all fly, and I just use a rope of climbing. I use a Qual's feather token ladder. Like, there's just so many other ways to deal with these situations in Pathfinder 2 that usually come from like a magical item that can sometimes become almost trivially cheap, that all their bags of tricks, I just don't think add up to much. The fact that, again, they're expected to potentially be a combative class, depending on what build you go with, the armor build, the weapon build, but like their weapon proficiency is, not their weapon proficiency. Their strength score is going to be a point or two behind because their key ability score int, but they still want a high int score. Very mad class. I think, you know, a lot of inventors are going to want a good strength, con, dex, and int. And it's not like nobody wants a horrible wisdom. That's your will save, right? So ultimately, class functions. It's fun. It's kind of zany, but I just don't think that the class performs at the level of other people. It's such a giant flavor fail that the weapon inventor can't have an advanced weapon as their invention. That is very true. That is very, I mean, if anybody should be wielding a flick mace K-Swiss deck, it should be an inventor, right? Like, that's like the one class. Like, if there was some weird class that had some zany item that zipped out a big revolving balls, it should be the inventor. I could deal with that. Well, yeah, of course this is going to go faster than ASR, Anthony. Also, we don't have to read it because we all know what these classes do. All right. Next, Cleric. He's up next. She's up next. I had the joy of playing a Cleric, but a Cleric, I think, from 1 to 15th level. And here's the deal. I understand that people can use medicine and treat wounds and focus spells to recover. But I don't see how you can make it through Pathfinder 2 game without having someone who can cast heal in your party. Full stop. When you are fighting extreme or severe encounters, the hit points drop so quickly. It's crazy. You need a cleric. For our cleric, and this is, by the way, both for cloistered and for war priest. Again, we're talking levels 1 to 7. This might change as we get higher level. Cleric is an A tier class. Yes, it is an A tier class, and I'll tell you why. Divine Font at low level gives you such a huge spell boost over everybody else in the game. At low levels, the war priest is totally, completely legitimate with a great weapon. They're behind at 5, but then they catch up at 7. they're actually even with the marshals at 7, all the way up until, you know, you get to 10 and the next ray of ability boosts. But levels 1 through 4, they're only 1 point behind. They can tank their wisdom. The Cloistered Cleric is going to have probably a 16 charisma. They're going to have 3 bonus divine spells. It's just, or is it 4? It might be 1 plus your charisma. And healing is so good. Now, here's the thing. The divine spell list sucks. We know this. But heal is so S tier. And in my opinion, it is just so required. And yeah, the cleric feat list, it's horrible too. I mean, there were literally levels where my cleric could not take any feats except for 1. There were literally levels. They might get 4 feats, and 1 required you to be evil, which my cleric was not, and 1 was basically a war priest feat that involved meleeing, and mine was a cloister cleric, and so that was out. And then there were 2 feats left, and both of them required different prerequisites from like 6 levels ago, and that you were unlikely to have both of. So you could get to pick 1 feat. And so most clerics end up picking healing hands and a bunch of other things, and you end up with, you guessed it, a heal bot. I think it's pretty boring class to play. I think the divine spell list kind of sucks. But at low levels, the divine spell list is by far and away the absolute strongest because of the access to heal. Heal is just that good. It's just that powerful. And again, the War Priest can get it done. You know, the War Priest can get it done. Case of success. And there's even 3 deities that can give you slow, 2 of which also give you healing font. You know what, K-Swiss deck? You're not too wrong about that. As long as you can have cast slow, you're okay. Yeah, I think just clerics are incredible. War priests are really fun. Not all war priests can pick up True Strike, Patrick. It's only war priests of the God of Battle, I think. So yeah, only I know the one is, I can't remember the God of Battle. It's the chaotic neutral one. The chat, Galarian and Death will probably chime in here with it in 5 seconds. But yeah, so not everybody gets True Strike. Obviously, if you have True Strike, I mean, that's incredible. That's amazing. But you know, at low levels, the divine spell list gets it done. You know, at high levels, the arcane spell list really starts showing everybody up because it's got things like Chain Lightning and Slow 2 and stuff like that. Gorham is the one I was thinking of. Thank you, Entheo. And that's great. But at low levels, you know, you just got Fireball at level 5. So, and you only have 1 of those or something like that per day. So, at low levels, it's pretty great. So, good stuff. Cleric, both War Priest and Cloistered Cleric, A. Okay, Iomedae and Erastil as well. Next, the Druid. All right. Well, Druid is our first C tier class. Now, again, I think all the casters have a problem at low levels, which is, you get 2 spells a day at level 1. You get 3 spells per day at level 2. Okay, I'm out of spells. I guess I'm just casting cantrips. Primal spell list is good. Not as good as the arcane, but you do get access to electric arc, and that's all that matters. Druid does not get access to magic weapon, and I do think that is actually something to keep in mind of, because until you get to level 4 and your party meleeers get their striking runes, give or take, a couple sessions, magic weapon is probably pound for pound one of the single greatest spells in the game. Divine list gets it, occult list gets it, arcane list gets it, primal list does not get it. That is a big knock on the Druid at low levels. They have a good save, not great, but they're okay. Their armor is okay. Like most casters, Druidic feats, not very strong. You have to choose an order. Some of the orders, like the one that gets a Beast Companion, are very, very, very strong. Some of the orders, like the Flame one, are pretty weak. Wild Shape is wonky and will never be as good as you want it to be. Sorry to say it, kind of just doesn't really work in this game, especially since you can't cast in that form. It can be fun just to change it up, but it's not broken, but it's not it does not function. It's just Pathfinder 2, math is tight, the class works, and it doesn't break anything. And that's why it's right in the middle of the road as a C. If you like the flavor, you go for it. If you don't, you don't. They do get Magic Fang. So if you got a bunch of animals running around in your party, that's pretty cool. But other than that, you know. Remember, though, too, magic weapon works better when you cast it on something that does like D10 or D12, because you're just getting more big bang for your buck. So Druid, I think, is a very solid middle-of-the-road class at C. Which brings us to our next C, which is going to be Ranger. All right. Ranger is, in my opinion, the most disappointing martial character. They get good saves. They get great saves, even, I would say. The Ranger, you know, has a really great perception. So these are all really good things. But Hunter's Edge is like a requirement. And while the Barbarian has to enter a rage and burn an action, which sucks, sometimes the Ranger can burn as many as 3 actions in a combat because of Hunter's Edge. And if you do have a target marked with your Hunter's Edge, you know, and the party, because of the changing tactics or dynamics of the fight, you suddenly need to go... It's not dead. Your target's not dead, but you want to go fight some other target because, you know, oh, it closed on the wizard. You suck. You cannot use your Hunter's Edge ability. If you're a Precision Ranger, no Precision. If you're a Hunter's Edge, Flurry Ranger, no Flurry. Hell, even Disrupt Prey requires that the target be your hunted prey. So you are just required to constantly be burning actions. The Ranger, to me, loses because of these hunt actions, which just eat up so much. Now, I know you get quick shot, you get quick attack, which are fine, which are great, you know, and that does help balance it out. But, you know, it doesn't completely counter it out, because at best, you know, you're even. You did, oh, my cool thing is that I get this ability that I can do these two. Yeah, but then you're even. And you had to spend a feat to do that. Gabriel, welcome. Patrick says the action cost is less bad for the precision because you only really want 1 attack per round anyways, but yeah, it really hurts the flurry. I do agree with that to a certain extent. I think precision is actually not as bad as some people might make it out to be. Also, a lot of your feats are sort of chain dependent. A Ranger really does have to decide if they're going melee or if they're going ranged. I think it would be really, really cool if the Ranger could really do both more effectively. We've seen Bob as a Ranger in Quest for the Frozen Flame try to do that. He picked up Quick Draw, but I just think the Ranger is just not efficient enough. Now later on, the Flurry map attack penalty drops to like 0. They get the ability to hunt multiple preys with a single action. Okay, then it becomes a lot different. But at low level, Boothby saying the same thing. At low level, it is a problem. And, you know, you don't have the speed and you don't have the ability to get where you want. And you're just going to be eating a lot of actions up. And it just ends up kind of, you know, kind of stinking. I'll also say, you know, Unfortunate Pumpkin, great segue. I will say in large maps like Northern Reaches, people with massive range are great in combat. Yes, I mean, Northern Reaches being a Knights of Last Call sort of sponsored game obviously takes my ideas to heart, and a lot of people are using larger maps. The bow rangers, the volley, and the massive range just don't come up a lot in your standard Paizo adventure, dungeon, or even an outside map, which might only be, you know, 10 squares by 10 squares at most. Inside a dungeon or inside a fortress or a room or a building in a Paizo adventure path, you'll be lucky if your room is even 6 squares by 6 squares. And so, boy, it you know, it does stink. So again, I think that the Ranger, it's fine. It's a C. I'm just saying that, you know, in a land where actions are at a premium and you're low level, they're even more of a premium. I think you really do struggle, for sure. All right, Gunslinger is our next one up. I wanted to give the Gunslinger an A Vin wanted to give the Gunslinger a C, and I think we ended up settling here at a B. So let's talk about it. The Gunslinger gets expert weapon proficiency. Here's the problem with the Gunslinger, and they get master at level 5. Number one, the Gunslinger is very much a one-trick pony. The Gunslinger, guns suck. Okay, let's deal with a couple things. Guns suck. If the Gunslinger, if you're critting all day, you will have a great time. The Gunslinger, guns suck if you don't crit. Secondly, reload is a problem. And, you know, I see, you know, people are still trying to get away sometimes with the cheese and the tethers, and reload sucks. And while the class gets a bunch of feats that try to get you around it, they are at best workarounds. Okay. The Gunslinger is not the fighter. Okay. The fighter just does what they do, and they do it all day. Okay. Reload, and then you're having to jump through all these hoops just to reload, and then you shoot and you hit and you don't crit, and you do like D6 damage. You're like, what are we doing here? What am I doing here? I could have just been a fighter. And you've been like, yeah, that'd have been really, really great. The range on some of the longer guns, not as important in most of your standard Paizo adventure paths. And it's a damage dealing class that I think, unless you're critting a lot, doesn't do the damage. And yes, they do have the increased attack bonus, and that is not nothing. I think they probably would be a C class if they didn't have this extreme, but they pay for it other ways. The Gunslinger literally basically cannot do anything else. And, you know, I think the Gunslinger was, yeah, Mark, I do think Gunslinger was really powerful in first edition. And I think they actively tried here to not make it broken in this edition, you know? So, you know, now I will say that, I mean, to Unfortunate Pumpkins thing, my experience is that Paizo AP tends to not use a lot of lower level enemies. I think Paizo tends to use a lot of on level enemies or +1 level enemies that I've seen, that I've run. If you are fighting a bunch of lower level creatures, yeah, then you can crit all the time and it's great. But the problem is when you're fighting lower level enemies, like even like the War Priest can just smash through the enemies. You don't need to be that much better. Lower level monsters in Pathfinder 2 are just not worth their XP. They're just very, very, very not important. So the problem with that, Joe, is they get a save. That's every other status effect in the game gets a save, except for knocking them prone. So they're not actually stun 1. And I also agree with Steven. I think ranged weapons did get over nerfed. So, you know, for sure. Steven, yeah, the save is very low, and most creatures that you want to save will pass the save. And then the creatures that you don't really, hey, there's 8 of these creatures. Hey guys, they get 24 actions between the 8 of them. I took off 1 of them, guys. Also, my crit probably killed it. So it's like, it doesn't even really matter at a certain point. Steven says, I find it weird that melee is given a bonus in damage because they have to be close when the maps are all small. 100% agree. I think range is way overly nerfed in this game. Like, even going back to the Ranger, I do think that the melee Ranger is probably the better Ranger of the 2 Rangers. Frost Raven, that seems totally 100% reasonable. I'm actually completely on board with that. All right. I don't even think it would be that crazy to let them add their dex to damage. We're a little bit more than halfway through. So I just wanted to take a quick break, and I wanted to say thank you for everybody who is watching. I want to say thank you to our patrons and to everyone who has supported us throughout the year as we go into the end of 2022. Knights of the Last Call is experimenting with some new forms of content. We started producing a monthly e-zine that our champion and hero tier members can get access to. We also have probably the largest Pathfinder 2 Western Marches, but even better than Western Marches style campaign running in the form of Northern Reaches. Signups for this season 1 of Northern Reaches, close October 15th. Okay? Season 1 ends at the end of November. Right now, a new character comes in at level 3 or 4. People can check me out. So if you're interested in playing some Northern Reaches and getting in before we announce Season 2, now is the time to do it. I should also note that if you're in Season 1 of Northern Reaches, you're also going to get first dibs for Season 2. All right? So if you've been thinking about it and you want to join our Discord, you want to join our Patreon so you can get into Northern Reaches, you're going to want to do that before October 15th. Okay? Because after October 15th, people can still sign up for the Discord, but new characters are not going to be allowed into Northern Reaches. It's the final 6 weeks of the campaign, and we're just going to be shutting it down. So, and I would also encourage you to get in. We just locked out Battlecry issue 1, which was our issue from August. That's now in the vault. If you sign up now, you can get Battlecry 2, which is going to be coming out in the next week or two. And then that also is going to be going in the vault. So start signing up now so you can get those Battlecry issues. We are really happy and proud of that. Aaron and I have been working on them. We've started talking to a couple of our patrons who have expressed some interest. We hope to get some other voices in there so that you can hear from our amazing, incredible, unbelievable community. And that all comes for free with your membership. And so we have a couple different tiers, a couple different options. I really encourage you to check it out. It's a lot of fun. Our Discord is it's smoking, people. You wouldn't believe how busy people are. People are up all the time chatting. We've got European gamers in there. We've got West Coast gamers in there. We've got people from Australia, New Zealand. Really, we just have an incredible, amazing array of people. The community that we have curated is top notch. Almost 250 strong, largest Pathfinder 2 Discord or Patreon, I should say, in existence. Check us out if you like Pathfinder 2. If you're interested in new games, check us out, because we talk about more new indie games, old indie games, brand new hotness. People are running our community games all the time. If you want to play role-playing games with some of the best people in the community, you want to join Night's Last Call. Joe has a question. Will Battlecry have short adventures? Joe, I hope so. Joe, once I would really love to at least put, Joe, a pre-built encounter. We might start with just like pre-built encounters, things that you could drop in as sort of hey, if you need a fight versus a troll den, here's that troll den, right? Something like that. So we'll probably start with encounters, but I would love to be able to get to the point where we're putting in little short adventures, little, I call them 200 minutes plus a bonus encounter, right? So very cool. 4, not 4E. I bought like 4E. I bought like 4 different games. So, question 2, where do you pitch ideas? Joe, we don't have like an open submission process yet. We are going to eventually have an open submissions process where patrons can submit an article. They fill out a little form that says, blah, 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 writes this. We'll get your idea. We'll review it. If we like it, we'll put it into our product. And we're hoping we can even compensate people who produce really cool stuff for us. So that's the plan, Joe. All right. So check us out. Thanks for everybody who's tipping. Thanks for everybody who is a YouTube member. And thanks to all of our patrons. All right. Magus is next. Magus gets a C. Here's the thing. I think if the Magus had come out, like, the Magus is a great example of a class that, like, they understood a little bit more that they're doing. If the Magus had come out during APG, then, like, the Magus would have been int core class, int key class. But it's a strength dex class. There's a couple different interesting builds for it. The Magus actually isn't as bad here, because while the Magus only ends up getting 2 and 2 of its highest tier spells, for the first couple levels of the game, our low level section here, it's actually not that far behind. It's not until you get to the mid levels when other people have 10 and 15 and 20 spell slots, and you are still stuck with 4 spell slots, that you are really, really going to feel, behind. At low levels, it's not so bad. I'm not going to lie. Arcane Cascade sucks. Okay, Arcane Cascade is such a huge disappointment. It is really, really horrible. Do we rank it F because raw Arcane Cascade and some feats don't work raw. I don't know. Just let me know. I don't know what that means. Now look, Spell Strike is very powerful. There's no doubt about that. But at low levels, when you only, everybody else only has a couple spells anyways, you have a couple spells anyways, it's not so bad. I'm not gonna lie to you folks. I think the Magus gets worse before it gets better. CMB!
Combat Medic Bush tipped $25.
CMB coming in with a $25 tip. Thank you, CMB. Appreciate all the help. Appreciate the continued support, my friend. Well-deserved. Hype boss win there. We love Combat Medic Bush. And love the support, sir. Thank you very, very much. I salute you, sir. Thank you for that tip. CMB never actually says anything. He just throws money at me and just says, I want to hear my praise. And I go, okay, you're going to get it. Okay, Arcane Cascade. It's a stance, right, with requirement your last action was to cast a spell. As soon as you do anything else, you lose that requirement and drop the stance. I mean, okay. Is that the official reading of it, or is it that's what you need to do to enter the stance? I see. Because in order to stay a stance, you need to continuously meet the requirements. And AC and Arcane Cascade is your last action, which is impossible to do. Got it. Okay. Ryan is saying that he believes that they errated that. It is a misprint, though. Okay, well, I'm not gonna be too pedantic about that. If that was like the 100% the case, then yeah, it would be an F. But they got an errata inside an NPC. Okay, cool. Great place for it. Thanks, Paizo. Again, at low levels, when everybody doesn't really have a lot of spells, the fact that you only get 4 spells is not as big of a problem. Tough to Joe, take care, sir. I love that message on your way out. Again, I respect that Spell Strike is probably one of the most powerful powerful actions in the game, but the Magus to me is a pretty one-trick pony, and Arcane Cascade is very disappointing, and you are going to see that the Magus is going to drop. I don't think the Magus will ever be an F, but by the time we get to the mid tiers, the Magus will be a D. I think early on you're not going to notice that everybody else has that many more spells than you, but even by the time you get to 5th level, and people are now getting there, they've got 3 first level spells, 3 second level spells, 2 third level spells, and now you're like, I got 2 and 2, or like 1 and 2. You'll be like, eh. CMB, aka Philip Bush, KLC got me into PF2, and the Discord allowed me to play my first PF2 game, so I have to show that support. Well, we appreciate you, buddy, and we love having you in here, and hopefully wish you all the best, and love that you got to play with us. So you know what, Corey, I'm gonna agree with you. Corey, I didn't say it because I'm like, I don't want to give the farm away. That's exactly what I was thinking, Corey. You and me are on the same tier, because by the time you get to high tier, you have enough ways to stack like bonuses and true targets and aids that you can like reliably basically crit with your Spell Strike, and then it's just game over. But I know, I'm sorry, K-Swiss. I got excited. Corey said what I wanted to say. I just said it. And he's on the money. He's right there. Horizon Thunder Sphere. And Ryder, I say it in the doobly-doo below. 1 to 7. Levels 1 to 7 is what I'm calling low level. So, Ryan, that is true, except for True Strike. That's the only problem. That's the main problem with the Magus. Also, having less spells at higher levels isn't that bad. The only spells people hear about are their highest, but they still only get 2 and 2 of their highest. It's not like they get 3 and 3 or 4 and 4 like a sorcerer. If they were 4 and 4, okay, I would not complain. If they were 4 and 4, if they were like a sorcerer where they got 3 spells, when they first leveled, and then they went to 4. If they were 4 and 4 instead of 2 and 2, I don't think I would complain as much. Gabriel says, I play as a bard and I do so much work for the Magus to crit. Synesthesia for -3 AC, Greater Invis for flat-footed, Inspire Heroics for +2 or +3. He is constantly getting crits. Agreed. I think at higher levels it becomes more reasonable again. DPS rotations suck in MMORPGs, and specifically, especially PF2, because after getting 3 actions, going back to a full version of full run attack sucks. Classes shouldn't be one-trick ponies, and you're going to keep going, but I do agree with that. In fact, in my notes that I wrote for the Magus, I said, Spell Strike is powerful, but all eggs in one basket approach. Eats up a bunch of actions to recharge, and are you really having fun with that? So, 2 and 2 is not enough unless you're just doing 2 combats a day. Also agree with that. And, you know, and having those lower level spells, you know, it gives you some of the fun and versatility and flexibility that being a spellcaster, you know, gives you and means. And I think that's important, you know? Oh, well. All right, who's next? The Monk, Mr. Monkety Monk. Monk's coming in at a B. I think people are sleeping on the Monk. How about that? I think people are sleeping on the Monk. I really do. Incredible saves. Incredible saves. Great perception. Great mobility, even at low level. The Dex build can have a fantastic armor class. Starts at Expert. It is a little bit multiple attribute dependent. I'm not going to lie. Most monks are going to probably want a Wisdom if they want to do any sort of stunning or key abilities. You're going to want to probably have a good strength because you're punching. You're probably going to want to have a good dex for your armor class. You're probably going to want a good con to boost your hit points. You end up really wanting 4 stats, you know? Corey
Charlon tipped $10. Cheers, Derek. Good stream tonight.
Cheers to you, sir. Thank you for the $10 tip. Appreciate you, and I'm enjoying this stream, so thanks. I'm glad you're enjoying it as well. Thank you so much for that tip. If you want to tip like Corey just did, or like CMB just did a little bit ago, there's a descriptive link below, or you can drop us a super chat. All of those are appreciated. Thank you so much. Sater says, but everyone wants those 4 stats. Yeah, but the Monk, being a melee-based combatant who can't wear armor, really wants dex, really wants con, really wants wisdom, because they even get DCs that key off of it. And then, of course, they need strength for the extra damage for their melee. So, Frostraven, of course they could do that, but then that would be very much like World of Warcraft, and it would look very much like a game, and then it would start to look like 4th edition. And, you know, people don't like 4th edition.
Dungeons and Dragons. Satan's game.
Except, you know, that would be 4th edition. I agree with Unfortunate Pumpkin. PF2 is the best monk in any version of D&D Pathfinder. Is Mad as big of a deal since you get 4 ability boosts? At low level, yes. By level 15, not as much. Because by the time you get to level 15, you've gotten through 3 sets of ability boosts. Maybe even level 10 by the time you've gotten 2 sets of ability boosts. And you can bring up some of those lagging. Like, your dex only needs to be so high, even if you're a strength-based fighter, strength-based monk. So, yeah. I think the monk is really good. I think they can, you know, stances can eat an action. So why aren't they A? They're not A for a lot of the same reason in my mind that the Barbarian isn't A. Having to eat actions just to be able to do your thing. Now, the monk isn't as tied to stances as the Barbarian is to raging. But you know, I think people are sleeping on the monk. You know, I put it at B. We could go back and forth on it. I don't know that it couldn't be A. So maybe it is like a B+, right? We don't have this here in this tier ranking, but maybe it is like a B+. And I think I'd be okay with that. And I'm even okay with saying that, you know, higher level, they could be. Another thing I like about the monk, okay? We talked about this with the fighter. The monk doesn't have a subclass. Stances are kind of like a subclass. They are, but you can just pick them. You know, it's a feat, basically. You're not actually messing with anything else. Now, you know, like you're not like locked into a subclass like a bard is with their muse, or a champion is with their tenant, or, you know, a druid is. So I think the stance is like a subclass, but you could pick them up throughout the game. You could retrain it really easily. It's just a feat, and you can add all these extra, or you could focus on one stance and be good with that, but you could add in a couple different stances. And I really, really, really like that. Having plus tiers is for indecisive cowards, and you are the opposite. Thank you, K-Swiss Deck. Yeah, no, I'm gonna stick with B, but I really could see that at A, and maybe in mid tier it does get to A. I also agree with Harjutapa here, who said that the monk gets that action economy back from flurry of blows. I agree, because while the ranger could potentially get back some of their action economy from twin strike or double shot, the ranger might be giving up 2 or 3 actions per combat to do multiple hunt preys. The monk is usually only going to enter 1 stance, and so as soon as you flurry once, your action economy neutral, but once you flurry a blow the second time, you are now action economy positive. And that's good beats. It's just good beats. I'm really impressed with the monk. 10 hit points, great saves. And that mobility early on can be really powerful yet. Not everybody's going to be sitting there with their boots abounding and their Wanda Longstrider spam yet. And so with a fleet and your first movement improvement, you could be at 40 foot of movement really quick. So I think that's enough that that people could really make a difference there. Hey, we got a super chat coming in. Oh, it's from our Australian friend himself, self-confessed cynic, coming in with a $50 Australian super chat. Had a bunch of fun working on this for chat. Definitely expect a lot of shakeup at higher levels. Yeah, so self-confessed cynic is none other than Vin, one of the longest ranking heroes from Knights of the Last Call patron, and someone who I really appreciate for his game design knowledge and his let's just call it what it is. His munchkin-y video game power gameness. He helped me put together this tier list, and we had a lot of fun discussing. I think we discussed it for 4 or 5 hours last night. And that was, and Vin also was one of the people I worked with when we originally created this list. So a lot of fun there. So, but yeah, really, Vin, I think Vin agrees with me very highly that, things are going to shape up at higher levels. But does fighter ever drop below S? Selfcom says no, and he is right. Spoiler alert. I don't think the fighter does drop below S. 19 AC level 1 flurry feels real good. 100% Corey. I think the monk is really good. Ryan, I think as we've played more Pathfinder 2, right, we've learned how important tripping and grappling are. The knights have talked about it a lot. That we're talking about it, and that we think it's important. But the monk can really get it done. It's just really solid class. I think it's a really great class. Okay, next is the Oracle. Oracles suck. They're horrible. They get the worst tradition in the game, folks. They're a bad spontaneous caster. Divine Tradition sucks. They get limited number of spells. Mysteries come with massive drawbacks, very limited upsides, weak saves. Horrible. Have you read what some of those mysteries do? They're horrible. The curses are not nearly worth the benefit. The whole point you should be taking a penalty so that you're really better at something, and you're not. It's a really bad class, people. It just does not function. And with the weakness of the divine list, and they're just a really bad cleric. Like, they don't get the divine font. Like, it's so crazy how much worse they are at a cleric at these levels. It really is. I don't even think the Life Oracle's good, Unfortunate Pumpkin. I really don't. They get that hit point buff, but the spell thing sucks. You can transfer like 1 or 2 hit points per round at level 1. It's bad. It's just bad. It's not a good class, and it does not have enough mechanical support, I think, to be viable. And I think the curses are way too punishing, and I think the abilities you get for those curses are just not even close to being worth it. Anthony, I completely agree with Anthony here. The curses would be worth it if they made the mystery benefits really good. Like, an ability from a class should make you better. The way that the Oracle is made is that the curses make you weak, and then the ability that it gives you might not even bring you up to where you were before, but at best It's just a tie, which means you're getting a class ability which is doing nothing. If I'm taking that kind of penalty, I should have incredible power. But here's why they didn't do it. Because players, especially Pathfinder 2 players, will do everything in their power to mitigate flaws. They will do everything in their power to mitigate a downside. That means if you can mitigate the downside on let's say an Oracle got really strong powers. They had some nasty curses, but they had some really strong powers. But a smart party, a tactical party, figured out a way to essentially make it so that the flaw actually wasn't that much of a flaw. By the way, you see this a lot of time in Pathfinder 2, not necessarily in the Oracle, but with other things, where there'll be like something with a disadvantage or a problem, and it'll specifically say in the text, note, like, there's absolutely nothing that the party can do. There's no resistances. There's no immunities. There's no way that you can prevent this damage from possibly being prevented, because that's how the game is balanced and we won't let you do it. The problem they were worried with Oracle is that if you give someone a lot of power for a penalty, if the players as a group or as an individual can figure out a way to mitigate that penalty, well, then suddenly you just have this really powerful character and they're not paying a cost for it all. Well, we can't have that. And so the abilities, the bonuses that you get from Oracle is just not worth it. And Boothby is right again. This is how Oracles worked in first edition. Huge power and a downside, which you could avoid. And that meant that you were just getting a huge power boost. Well, they didn't. This is a class that got hit hard because of what they saw happen in Pathfinder 1. And so, maybe the Oracle got overcorrected, right? So, I love it. Corey says, Pathfinder 1, Pathfinder First Edition Oracle. I was blind because of my curse, so my whole party took blind fight, scent, life sense, and then we just spammed darkness all day. This is a perfect example. This is like a perfect example of how that would work. I also don't, I think that's a smart idea, Ragon. They should have had made curses ebb and flow, or made it a chance to happen, then always getting worse, blah, blah, blah. And again, we only have 2 oracles in all of it. So yeah. All right. Psychic. Now, I will make a note here about the Psychic and the Thaumaturge. These are new classes. I have not played with them. I've read them. I did an article. I did reviews on them. We talked about them. Not seen them. I haven't played with them personally. I have not game mastered for a Psychic and a Thaumaturge. So if there were 2 classes that get a big asterisk, it's these 2 classes. Okay. Psychic is going to get a C. They get to pick between the intelligence and charisma. I like that. That's a cool option. Their armor saves suck, and their armor and their saves suck because they're a caster. They use occult tradition, which is, we know, the second strongest tradition, and we've come to like the occult tradition a lot more. But remember, they do get only 2 spells per level. Now at low levels, this isn't as bad, but I mean, by the time you get to the higher levels, you're going to be down 10 spells from your compatriots. But at low levels, everybody's kind of casting a lot of cantrips anyways. At levels 1 and 2, people only have 2 or 3 spells. So you're only going to have 2 spells either. And everyone's going to be casting a lot of cantrips, but your cantrips get focused. And so that really makes up for it. So at low levels, the Psychic can hang with the other casters because, yeah, I mean, you're going to be casting, everybody's going to be casting a lot of cantrips, and the Psychics cast the best cantrips in the game. Are they fun? I don't know. My guess is no. I think they're probably very, 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 very repeated. Like, I think you're just going to be doing the same things over and over and over again. Now, Parallelogram says, or actually, Parallelogram says that the Psychic is the most fun caster. I haven't played it, so it could be a very fun class to play. But we'll see how it develops. Now, your point, high level Psychic cantrips are going to be incredibly powerful. Yeah, but most people aren't really. I struggle to believe that a Psychic, and I've read the text, but I mean, again, I haven't seen it played. I struggle to believe that a boosted cantrip is going to be as powerful as a equivalent 8th level spell slot. It won't be. We already know that focus spells are not as strong as spell slot spells. So, when you know, are just spamming focus spells, psychics pay that price. Pathfinder 2 will not let a character have an infinite resource and not punish them for it. We know that spell slot spells are the best, more powerful. Focus spells are a tier below that, and cantrips are below that. Yes, the psychics do get a number of regular slot spells, but they are meant to be cantrip and focus casters, and that means that those spells are going to be weaker. Now, if we were playing Pathfinder 2 and we were going through 7 or 8 encounters in a day, and all the spell casters were suddenly out of their highest level spell slots, and they're just relying on their lower level spell slots, suddenly that focus spell that's being maximized looks really, really great. But how often does that really happen? You know, Parallelogram, I completely believe it. So listen, Psychic is a C. It's not a bad class. I think it's just totally reasonable. I think it's pretty fun. I will also say that they can unleash, but you know, you gotta wait. You know, my experience has been Pathfinder 2 combats can be pretty quick. A lot of times the combat may not be officially over, but it's kind of over by round 2 or 3. And so, you know, having to wait to unleash your psyche can sometimes suck. A lot of those fights can end really, really quickly. So, you know, you do have to be mindful of that. Something to consider. But at low level, I think them having less spell slots than normal casters is not as big of a drawback. And you're going to be casting a lot of cantrips. And I think, you know, that thing. Parallel, I also agree with you there. I think a whiz option would have been really cool. If you're playing a type of campaign, Unfortunate Pumpkin, like the way that like some of my games go, where you get a bonus to experience the longer you go between long rests, like, yeah, that would be really awesome. That would be really cool. But most people, especially remember the confines of these ratings, we assume that most people are going to be playing Paizo Adventures, Paizo Adventure Paths, or homebrew that is probably fairly similar to Paizo Adventures and Paizo Adventure Paths. And in my experience, having run a number of Paizo Adventure Paths currently and in past, most time it's not uncommon for you only to do 1 or 2 encounters a day. Sometimes you might do 3 or 4. 5 is really pushing it. It really is. So that's been my experience. Maybe yours is different. All right, the Sorcerer. The Sorcerer is a B. Like I said, at low level, all the casters, you know, they don't have a lot of spell slots. Sorcerer can be any tradition. They rely on charisma, which to me is, you know, because I also say this about the Cleric, you know, they rely on wisdom. Wisdom's a great stat to have because it does tie to one of the 3 most important saves. It ties to saves, but it ties to one of the 2 most important saves. And some people might argue that will is even more important than fort. So Sorcerer is being stuck to charisma. Charisma's not always the most, you know, important or interesting. That being said, you know, they start with a focus pool. They have access to all the traditions, so they can be arcane, which is great. They get a focus pool right off the start. You can pick whatever tradition you want. Obviously, you know, some traditions might be a little bit higher, a little bit, you know, more powerful than others. But at low levels, a sorcerer is okay. Sorcerers, in my opinion, really come into their power when they get a lot more spell slots. They get access to some of their better class feats. Things like cross-blooded evolution and things like that. But in the beginning of the game, you know, you're probably going to be, you know, casting a couple spells and then relying on focus spells and cantrips. So, you know, now the sorcerer does get the most, and spontaneous can be pretty powerful even early on. And then, you know, right at the end of this level range, you're going to pick up your fireball, your lightning bolt. And AoEs really do change the game. Those kind of long range AoEs, fireball, lightning bolt, which you get just at the end of this tier, but really come into their own when you get to the mid tiers where you pick up Cone of Cold and Chain Lightning. That can really change the game for casters. Early on, when you're just casting Hydraulic Push or something, or even Magic Missile, and like the Barbarian is like power attacking with a striking rune on a D12 weapon, and they're doing 3D12 plus, you know, 5 damage or 6 damage, and you're like, okay, your character just did 30 damage, and I'm going to use one of my highest tier spells, and I'm going to do like 15. You're like, and you can just do that every round. It's kind of rough. So early game, B. Later game, Sorcerer has the potential to be very, very broken. We'll see that as we go as we get on further. 4 classes to go, people. Oh, and slow. Yes. All right. Summoner. I'll be honest with you. I don't like the Summoner. Strat fought for the Summoner. Here's the thing. Strat said you can't think of the Summoner as a spellcaster, which is fair. It's a spellcaster without spells. I feel like the Summoner is a lot of work for a character that functions okay. Like, you're just not really getting a whole lot of bang for your buck. You know, yes, there are feats, there are things that you can take. Summoner, again, the Summoner is limited on spell slots, but at low levels, that's not as apparent. It'll become apparent higher on, for sure. But through the first couple levels of the game, the fact that you're only going to have 2 and 2, not as much of an issue. But yeah, I mean, like, the Summoner, to me, oftentimes feels like it gets the worst of both worlds. You know, you're sharing this hit point pool, but you got to manage both of yourselves, and you can do all this split and sharing actions. But at the end of the day, it's like, but are you really actually doing that much extra? Now, yes, you get the cool fantasy. Like, you can attack with your Eidolon, which is like an okay melee combatant. It's not like it's the Barbarian, right? It's not like it's the Rogue, right? It's not like it's the Ranger. Like, the Eidolon is not going to be as effective of a melee combatant as any of those characters, because not only do they have these really cool special abilities, they have all these feats that make them that much stronger at that. No, the Eidolon is like a Druid wild shaping. All right, I'm going to give you martial equivalent proficiency, and you're going to do martial equivalent damage, but with none of the extra flair and special spice that make you powerful. Now, at early levels, you know, the Summoner can do the cool thing where the Summoner gets to cast a spell and the Eidolon gets to attack, or, you know, and move or attack. That's very cool. You're like, oh, it's like I'm doing 2 things at once. I'm not attacking the Barbarian, but I am attacking. I'm casting a spell. But you get 4 spells a day, people. So you could do that, you know, for 2 or 3 rounds, and then that's it. You're done. You're done for the day. Then you're just casting cantrips. I am not okay with just casting cantrips. So full stop. So yeah, I mean, you are essentially trading in, you're getting 2 quasi characters that are not the best at what they do. And ultimately, yes, yeah, Patrick, thank you. You said it better than I, tried to. Hold on a sec. My dog is chewing on a bone. He's upset because I took his bone away. Patrick said, playing a Summoner is like playing 2 D tier characters, but you get to play them at the same time. And I agree. The Summoners I've seen have always gone down really quickly for a 10 hit point class. I also agree with that. You're like, hey, look, I could take twice as much damage because I can get attacked over there and I could get attacked right here. And so that's pretty brutal. Again, I don't think the class at early levels is bad, but I think at low levels, it functions. It doesn't fail to function. Now, as you get higher level, people, I don't think having that Eidolon is worth trading in, 26 arcane spells. Just saying. Boothby, where do you think the Kineticist would fit into the list based on your playtest look? Probably somewhere around a C, Boothby, maybe going down into D. Like, it's probably a D. I don't know if it's an F. Maybe that one build is an F, but I thought the one build was okay. The one element was okay. We were pretty impressed by Earth. I don't remember. All right. 3 left. Swashbuckler. Swashbuckler to me is a solid, again, number 1, it should be an archetype. Full stop. It should be an archetype. So there's that. Swashbuckler to me is a C. It's good saves. It's a dex-based class, so it's kind of like a dex-based fighter, but it gets this extra kind of you know, Cardinal, Richelieu, Musketeer stuff thrown on top of it. You know, it has some skills for combatant. It can be a high damage dealer, but you really have to gain panache, and then you have to hit with a critical finisher, and you have to hit. And that's a lot of hoops to jump through to just do your thing. And ultimately, I don't know that it is entirely worth it. At higher levels, you get some pretty decent finishers, but at early levels, you don't really have those yet. And confident finisher is okay, but it feels like a consolation prize at best. Again, after all the work that you went through just to gain panache, you're a dex-based class. Probably, you know, your strength might be okay, but you get this extra little bonus to damage, but only if you have the panache. But it's not a lot of extra damage. It's only like 2 points. It doesn't, to me, feel like there's enough there to make it compelling. This is one of those ones again, but I really think doesn't feel like there's enough there to warrant being a class. And all the extra abilities they get feel like they could easily be fighter or rogue feats anyways. So I don't know that you're really adding a whole lot with the Swashbuckler. So, but you know, mathematically the class works. There's nothing wrong with that. It's you know, it's like a rogue with a kind of a weaker sneak attack. And then sometimes you can do a lot of damage with your finisher. So, you know, that's my thought on the Swashbuckler. But the class does function. And again, it's focused on Dex, which is a great ability score. It applies to some really useful skills, like in acrobatics, and it applies to your reflex save, which is obviously important. But you know, you probably also want some other things because again, you're a combatant. You're going to want some Constitution because you're in melee, and you probably want some strength to do a little bit of extra damage. So again, it also gets a good amount of skills for a traditional combatant. But again, managing panache can be difficult. Also, there's a little bit of GM dependency there. Because obviously there are certain key core actual actions that you can take in the game that will grant you panache. But sometimes it's like, hey, GM, does that grant me panache? And if they say yes, you know, then you're in business. If not, you know, you're in trouble. I should have had an extra part that says should have been an archetype. Well, we're only doing 22 classes, Ragged Wolfbane. I didn't want to go through the extra effort for it. We can go, at the end, we'll go through it. And we'll talk about which one should have been it. Boothby says, Derek only believes in like 4 classes, and everything else is an archetype, though. Maybe not 4. But yeah, kind of, sort of, maybe. I mean, like, yeah, well. Like, to me, the RPG Strike does it best, which is it asks, what is your character's role in a combat? Sorry. What is your character's role in a combat? Are you a defender? Are you a damage dealer? Are you a support character? And then it asks, how do you do that role? I'm a damage dealer. Okay, well, how do you do that? How do you do that? Do you do that in melee? Do you do that with ranged? Okay, and wherever you have an intersection of a role and a way, that's a class. Okay, the flavor of that, and that could just be pure mechanics. Then the flavor of that class can kind of be done through archetypes. Anyways, I'm sorry, I'm just catching up with chat here. Ryan says, it looks like most of the non-core classes are ranked low. Could this be because of the hoops that come with them are more manageable for experienced players? No. Yes and no. I think it's because when you get to you don't want power creep, right? They don't want to be accused of power creep. So I think they're consciously aware of power creep. 1. Number 2, they are probably not as well play tested, just by definition, as some of the core classes. And 3, I think they don't. I don't want to say what it is. They want to create an experience of adding complexity, without having to like completely rework the game. And so you end up having like all these hoops that you're jumping through, but you don't get a lot of benefit for doing it. I did all the things, and now I'm still not as good as a fighter. And so I think that's why it ultimately ends up getting ranked low. If I'm going to jump through all these hoops, I want a payoff. But it's not the way that Pathfinder 2 is designed, since the math is tight and there's no way to break through that cap short of just raw class-based proficiency scales. You're jumping through all these hoops, and ultimately it doesn't feel like the payoffs are worth it. Does that make sense? They pulled Cavalier and made it an archetype, so I don't understand why they made some of these classes. Exactly, Cavalier used to be in the APG, and now it's an archetype. So, I guess Cavaliers don't have popular movies, but Swashbucklers have Jack Sparrow. Yeah, I absolutely don't know. I don't know what it. I don't know what. I don't exactly know what it is. So. All right, sorry, a lot of chat here going on. Sorry, guys, getting caught up. At the end of the day, it's a popularity contest from the point of view of the designers. If it is not popular and situational, then it goes to archetype. I agree with that. Steven agreed with me that they are afraid of the power creep. Good call, Steven. Let's see. Yeah, I agree, Casey. They spent years on the CRB classes and months on everything since. Correct. Okay. Jorabite. Non-related question about the channel. If I join on the Patreon, do I still need to join on the YouTube to comment in your live streams? Jorabite, you do not. You do not. So, if you want to swap that over, you can totally do that. YouTube is just an extra level of support, and if you wanted to swap that over to a Patreon membership, I think that's a good idea. All right, let us finish off here. All right, we got Wizard. I'm gonna skip the Thaumaturge for now. Wizard. Guess what? Wizard's a C. I like the Wizard. I do. I really do. They have obviously horrible armor, horrible saves, horrible perception. Some of the worst in the game. And you might say, well, so does the Cloister Cleric. Well, at least the Cloister Cleric is wisdom based, so at least their will save's pretty good. The Wizard doesn't even get that. They're int based class. They do get Arcane. They're prepared caster, which ultimately we kind of think is probably a disadvantage in this game. But Thesis and school abilities can be very powerful and useful. Being low level means you don't have a lot of spells. You even have less spells even. Potentially if you take a school specialization and you don't get drain bonded item 1 per class level. So like all casters, weaker at lower levels. The Wizard becomes, especially with prepared, becomes a lot stronger when they get more access to having a wide range of spells so that they can handle a variety of situations. But at this point in the game, the Wizard is just a C tier. It's okay, but it's not. It doesn't have the powerful cantrips and flexibility of the Bard, and it doesn't have access to the heal, which is so powerful, and Divine Font, which is especially powerful at low level when you're so desperate for spell slots. And because the Wizard potentially has less spell slots, and then really once a Wizard's out of spells, they are literally doing nothing else but casting cantrips. They end up being a C class. Is it bad? No, of course not. The Wizard totally functions. And because it's based on the Arcane Tradition, and we know how powerful the Arcane Tradition gets later on, you can expect the Wizard class to move up the tier rankings once we get into the mid-tier. But Wizard class feats suck. Sorcerer feats better, especially in the mid-tiers and the high tiers. But the Wizard class feats are not really exciting. And they don't get a lot of spells. And if you take Universalist and you get multiple drained items, you get a couple more spells per day, which can be useful. But there's not a lot really going on with the Wizard at low level. You don't really have any other abilities or features except for your spells. And you don't get a lot of them at low level, so you kind of end up twiddling your thumbs a lot. It functions, but it's not really exciting. And I love the Wizard, by the way. But all right, Thaumaturge. Haven't played it. No one's played it that we know of. But man, is it impressive. A tier. I mean, we've all read the class, right? It could be an S tier class. Honestly, I don't know. It could be too good. It honestly could be too good. We don't know. But, you know, great saves. Thaumaturge is, of course, the newest, you know, Thaumaturge is a great example where it's a Ka-based class, and then they come in with these very 4th edition D&D style abilities that say, yeah, it's a Ka-based class, but esoteric lore needs to but it's lore, but it instead of it uses your charisma, because it's based off of your personality. Like, they're making concessions to gamist mechanics, and they are starting to take simulationism and they're starting to kind of shit on it. Now, that could make people upset. It certainly made people upset during the 4th edition era, right? But right now,
I am strong.
Thaumaturge is strong. Thaumaturge has incredible versatility, and it's real versatility, because as you start going, even before, remember, we're only in low level tier, you will have your second implement before we reach the end of this level 1 to 7 tier, right? You are going to gain up to 3 implements. You could customize your Thaumaturge to do whatever you want it to do. You could be offensive with your sword or your weapon build implement. You can add a lot of ranged power and sort of elemental versatility in terms of damage types by going with a wand. The Chalice makes you a really good secondary kind of paladin-esque lay on hand style healer. Very cool class. And the way that they trigger the abilities to work kind of with charisma, instead of being like, well, you know, your key stat is charisma, but you really need strength and con. And instead, it's like, oh, but my esoteric lore, which everything triggers off of. Well, I guess you need int 2. Nope, you don't need any of that. Like, it really does work off of it. And I think Onion Knight coming in here, I said this in the preview video that we did a long time ago. I also agree it's a very adventure-esque class. Also, Unfortunate Pumpkin, their class feats are awesome. There's that whole scroll, like the way that rangers get snares. They get scrolls, like, it's so awesome. They just get this whole they get this almost like subclass just with a couple of feats. Class feats is incredible. I think it's a really great class. I hesitate to give it an S because I haven't seen it enough to know if it's actually broken. But I think this class design is impeccable. It plays extremely well. It's definitely, we're not giving it's not an S, it's an A, but it is an A+. It is really a solid class. I promise you, people playing Thaumaturges are not going to be disappointed. The class just works. It works on a mechanical basis. It works on a functional basis. It works on a versatility basis. And it's just really good. So I'm seeing a lot of people coming in with some Thaumaturge stories here. Patrick says the Thaumaturge hits crazy hard, and Ryder's playing one and loves it. Only a tiny bit of play, but it's blowing me out of the water. That's great. The feats are great too. I also agree with that. Played a few sessions, and I'm 100% on with the S tier, at least with the weapon system anyways. Aeon Rider, if I recall correctly, Thaum is the only class besides Fighter that can get AOO at first level. Yeah, that sounds right. That does sound right. It's weird that the Thaumaturge feels like power creep, but I agree with Aeon Rider. It's not actually power creep. It just is exciting because it works and it feels well designed, and the class abilities feel synergistic instead of antagonistic. And you're like, wow, what is going on here? I make choices and I feel good about them, and they work well with some of the other choices that I made. And boy, this class is just a joy to play. So yeah, and also it's not busted, Corey. I mean, you know, they are behind, and that's okay, because they get all this extra benefits, and that's okay. If the Thaumaturge was striking as accurately as the Barbarian, we would have a real problem on our hands, I think. So I think it's really cool, but yeah, needs more play testing for S tier, but fun wise, it's definitely A tier or higher. So and I agree, and I think I think that's important too. How often have you played a class in Pathfinder 2 and gotten to a point where you thought, there's really not a lot for me to do here? I think the Thaumaturge just really has a ton of extra things. And also, too, because of their special, part of Pathfinder 2, I've talked about this in role-playing games in general. A big part of being able to play Adventure Paths, a big part of being able to play adventures in these TTRPGs in our modern era is just knowing what the hell to do. And since GMs and adventurers love to gatekeep information behind checks and knowledge, Thaumaturge is good at that too. It's good at combat, but it's also remember, our criteria here was getting you through your Paizo adventure. And because they have all this lore and all this knowledge and all this other stuff, the Thaumaturge is just good at getting you through your adventure. I'll make a bunch of checks so that I know where we need to go, so that I know what we need to fight, which I'm also good at doing, so that we can make some more checks, so that we need to know, what's the next breadcrumb in the line of this railroad, so that we can get to the end of the adventure. The Thaumaturge kind of checks all the things. So, all right, that's it. We did it. It's just a little bit after 9 o'clock. So 2 hours and 15 minutes, 22 classes ranked. And we got ourselves a nice looking little bell curve, and it is balanced to the top. And I got to say, I'm happy about that. I am happy about that. Oh, we got a nice super chat here from Ragon Wolfbane coming in with a $10 super chat. Its core is great design. Ragon is talking about the Thaumaturge. Its design could have been used for the Alchemist, and it would have at least made it C tier by having fields work like implements where you pick and choose the benefits. 100% agree. Look, Thaumaturge has the benefit of almost 3 years of playback, playtesting, experience, feedback, seeing how the game is working once the rubber meets the road, of being out there and being played by hundreds of thousands of people every year. It's just, it's probably, it's going to benefit. They know how to make classes better now. So Jorabite's coming in here with, I think, what is an important point. He says, knowledge based on charisma breaks reality for me. This is the nature of the 4th edition problem. Okay? 4th edition had classes that were like, they were like warrior classes that were based on Constitution, and they like attacked with Constitution. Because mechanically in the game, you needed your highest stat to be the thing that you attack with in order to be effective. The Thaumaturge is, like I said, it is sacrificing verisimilitude, okay? Meaning, does this make sense from if this was real life? Does this pass the sniff test? We are sacrificing simulation. We've talked on this channel before about the G, N, and S scores. Gamist mechanics, narrativist mechanics, simulationist mechanics. Pathfinder 2, especially Pathfinder 1, traditionally were very low narrative mechanics, pretty balanced between game and simulation. Pathfinder 2 has started to shift the game score up and the simulation score down. And with class designs like the Thaumaturge, you are seeing that shift even more so. The Thaumaturge is a very gamist-friendly class. It doesn't care as much about making sense if this were real, like using your charisma for esoteric lore. It doesn't make any sense. You're right, Jorabite. It's bad. And for some people, that breaks the feeling that the game is real. But for a lot of people, especially the way that a lot of people are playing Pathfinder 2, I think they would rather have a better designed game mechanic than something that, quote, made sense. So, your feeling is completely valid, Jorabite. And that feeling, Jorabite, is why a lot of people had problems with 4th edition. 4th edition is Thaumaturge taken 2 levels higher, right? To the point where the simulation elements have dropped real low, and the game is kind of what is really at the forefront. They wanted to make sure that the game was the most fun to play. So, but thank you for that super chat, Ragon. I do agree with your assessment. The Alchemist, using the Thaumaturge-based design for Alchemist, would be incredibly, it would just be a much better design. Would Witch be D if it could get Inspire Courage as a hex? Well, no. I mean, I don't think Witch having Inspire... Oh, would Witch... Well, Witch is D. Would the Witch be C? Probably. Probably. Do we know who the lead designer of Thaumaturge was? Actually, I do not. I know Mark Seifter worked on Dark Archive, but I don't actually know who did the Thaumaturge. Unfortunately, it says the more I hear about 4E, the more I want to play it. There is a 4E module for Foundry, and I've tried to set it up, but it has nothing. There's no compendiums because none of that stuff is open release. So you have to manually code it all in from your books. It's a lot of work. I value that S too high, way too high for the Thaumaturge to even hit my radar. I mean, there's nothing wrong with that, Crazy Fuzzy. One of the things I tell people all the time is it's important to know what kind of game mechanics you like. Do you like very board gamey, Magic the Gathering, video game style game mechanics where you're not as interested in this telling a good story or this, simulating a reality? You just want a fun game where, you get to play your cards and activate your ability, and it's chess is a good game. It's not really simulating anything. It's not trying to tell a story. It's just a bunch of game mechanics, right? That's a pure game. 10. But there's nothing wrong with wanting that in your TTRPGs, and there are some games like 4th edition and yes, even Pathfinder 2 that have higher gamist scores than other role-playing games. But there are also role-playing games that have higher narrativist focus and yes, higher simulationist focus. There's a wide palette of choices out there for you to choose from, and that's why it's so important to try a bunch of role-playing games and find the ones that really work for you, or really get a sense for what kind of role-playing games you do like, and then maybe make house rules to some of the ones that you are playing, or that you like some of it but not all of it, and that way you can change it to make the game more better for you. I do agree with Frostraven. There's a lot of rose-tinted glasses when people remember 4th edition. I played several 4th edition campaigns to completion. I played a 1 to 30 to completion. I had problems with it. I have problems with every system. A lot of people's critiques about 4th edition, I think, are actually the opposite of rose-tinted glasses. I think they're overly harsh on it, and I think that I don't think I'm not trying to sugarcoat its flaws, but I think a lot of the flaws, are overstated. What was this video you're referencing where you talked about games? I think it was a live stream, Nemo, and I'm not 100% sure. Sorry. I don't know. Maybe I'll just do a video specifically about GNS. It's a good idea, Nemo. Thank you. I'll do that. All right. Self-confessed cynic with a nice super chat. Thank you, buddy. I often try to make my S happy by inventory headcanon for stuff like use X for Y. Ha ha ha. X for Y, too useful a mechanic to abandon. Yes. I mean, that is usually how that works. Simulationists want some sort of tie for an ability, for inventing. Yeah, I often try to make my S happy by inventing headcanon for stuff like use X for Y. X for Y, too useful mechanic to abandon. Yeah, usually you could tell when people want their game to be real, because that way it'll mean more to them. And so they need to be able to tie that game mechanic to something in the real world that makes some sort of sense. Like a great example of this is the Mark in 4th edition. If you were a fighter in 4th edition, if you made an attack roll against an enemy, miss or hit, you put the marked condition on them, and they got a -2 penalty to attack anyone else except you. If they attacked you, no penalty. If they attacked anyone else, a -2 penalty. Now, fundamentally, everybody understands that this makes a lot of sense. You can simulate it because you're like, okay, you're in melee, and I've got my shield, and I've got my hammer, and we're fighting, and I swing my sword at you. And whether I hit or miss, I'm disrupting you. I'm getting in your face. I'm making it difficult for you to, attack the rogue. Everyone's fine with that. But in 4th edition, if I attack you, and you're marked, and then you leave combat with me, you walk 30 feet away to go attack the wizard who is standing off on his own, in 4th edition, you are still marked. And you will still get a -2 penalty to your attack roll, even though you are nowhere near me, and I am holding a hammer and a shield. And a lot of people's brains broke because they go, but But what is the fighter doing? How are they disrupting them? It doesn't even make sense. Okay, maybe it doesn't. I don't know. I mean, you could try to come up with some sort of headcanon reason for it. Ultimately, it doesn't work. It worked great as a game. It was a fantastic mechanic. It made defenders defend without relying on like a cheesy taunt mechanic. But you know, it did make sense. But that's because it was not a narrativist mechanic, and it was definitely not a simulationist mechanic. It was a 100% gamist mechanic that just existed to facilitate the game. So thank you for that super chat. Yeah, Frostraven, thank you. Of course, but most people with black tinted glasses didn't even finish reading the cool rules. They were repulsed, and that was it. I know, because that happened to me. I also agree with you, Frostraven. I think people went in with a very negative connotation. They saw the flaws only, and then they stepped away. A lot of the beauty and elegance of 4th edition really comes only if you've played it, and you've also played a lot of other games, and you've seen some of the problems that creep up in other games. Maybe you don't think they're a problem, though, and so 4th edition is solving a problem that you never thought was a problem to begin with. Do you think the S on this ranking is also a bad thing with like spells? Yes, Brothleth, I do. I think the fighter's too strong. It eats into the design space of other classes. I don't like that the fighter is as good as they are. I don't like that the fighter who's taking, you know, archetypes into Barbarian is, you know, in some cases will feel like a better, you know, damage dealer. And also, ultimately, the problem with this, the Barbarian gets to rage. The monk gets stunning fist. The rogue gets sneak attack. All these cool things only happen if you hit. If you hit. Everything triggers off of hitting. 4th edition had this problem too, because in 4th edition, you didn't even have strikes. I mean, you had melee basic attacks, but you never made them. In 4th edition, everything was damage and an effect. This attacks them and knocks them prone. This hits them and puts a debuff on them, right? There was never any just vanilla attacks. So in 4th edition, if you missed, not only were you not doing any damage, you also weren't doing your cool thing that you were applying. And you want to do the cool thing that you're applying. But, you know, so hitting became everything. It became everything. And so in this game, in Pathfinder 2, when you miss, you have accomplished nothing. Nothing. You've wasted an action. You could have just said pass and accomplished the same thing. And so hitting is kind of the most important thing to happen in Pathfinder 2. Everything keys off of hitting. I know there's a few exceptions. Oh, so my Alchemist does 1 point of splash damage. All right, you win. But like, for most of these martial classes and these melee classes, you have to be able to hit. And the fighter just does that better than everyone else. And so, you know, that's just too strong in a game where everything keys off of hitting. That's all. And where missing sucks. Not to mention the fact that once you missed once, now you're hosed. Like, if multiple attack penalty only increased when you hit, it may not be as bad. But the fact is like, once you swing and miss on the first attack, now you're in real trouble. So yeah. Nemo. Everyone here seems to feel that the sim aspect of the game isn't as important as the narrative, but you just said exactly why I think about it so much. I just need things to make sense. Great stream. Thank you, Nemo. Appreciate it. I agree with, of course, Mr. CMB himself. 4E would have been done well if WotC called it something other than D&D. Yes, I've said it a million times. If 4th edition had come out as a new experience for Dungeons & Dragons, tactics, right? Like Final Fantasy. If Final Fantasy Tactics, people love Final Fantasy Tactics. Even the people who hate Final Fantasy Tactics love Final Fantasy Tactics. If Final Fantasy Tactics, I'm sorry if you don't know this game, but if Final Fantasy Tactics had come out as Final Fantasy VIII, people would have lost their minds. But it didn't. Final Fantasy Tactics came out as Final Fantasy, Tactics. And everyone's like, oh, okay, it's a Final Fantasy game, but it's a Final Fantasy Tactics game. Okay, legit. All these games, you guys know me, I'm not a video game player. All these things, all these books on the back here, okay? I have one video game book. It is the Prima official strategy guide to Final Fantasy Tactics from, Jesus, when is this from? 1997. All right? 1997. It's like the only video game book I have on my, I might have a World of Warcraft book on there too. But Final Fantasy Tactics, I thought was a fantastic game. But if they had called it Final Fantasy VIII after Final Fantasy VII, people would have lost their mind and people would have hated it. Even for the people who would have loved it, they might have hated it. And certainly the people who did hate it would have really hated it. Instead, there were people who said, you know, Final Fantasy Tactics wasn't my favorite type of game. I didn't like the, you know, the turn, the very structured melee combat, the tiles, the grid. But it's fine. It wasn't a Final Fantasy game. It was Final Fantasy in the universe, but it was Final Fantasy Tactics. So I'm fine with it. If 4th edition had been Dungeons and Dragons Tactics, I think it would have had the same effect that Final Fantasy Tactics had, where it is this beloved game that was so unique and interesting and really scratched a very different itch. And yeah, and that's the case. Okay, wow, we're getting a lot of Final Fantasy Tactics love here. Vin says Tactics rocks. Jason says FFT is my favorite game, and yes, FFT would have caused a lot of riot if it was Final Fantasy VIII. Dungeons Dragons 4E, Tombs and Tactics, sure, I'll buy it. Steven, Final Fantasy Tactics rocks. Tiles and Tactics. 1997, you were 4. Well, as I said, this Saturday, the 24th, I will be 40. I was born in 1982. So that will make 1997. That would have made me what? I can't do the math. 15. Yeah, that sounds about right. I got brain fog. That's the one that starts with the snowball fight, right? You are correct. It does start with the snowball fight. Well, 4E did have some problems. I won't lie to that, but it did fail primarily to marketing and expectation mismatch. 100%. 4E was not designed for the 3rd edition audience. It was designed for the other audience. Okay. Oh, screw you with your Ninja Calc. But yeah, 4E was designed to bring in the quote video game audience. It was designed to bring in the World of Warcraft audience. It really was. It said, hey, look at our old game. It's basically built on 1970s tech. Yes, 3rd edition was a crowning achievement. I love 3rd edition. It's beautiful. But let's face it, by 2008, when 4th edition came out, Dungeons & Dragons 3rd edition was pretty much the same Dungeons & Dragons that people have been playing since 1974. And they wanted to do something different, and they wanted to really update the game and, you know, get it out of the dodgy past and make it into something with real game design, real thought put into it, and have like a, you know, and here's the thing about 4th edition. You could not like it, but at least it had a point. It was trying to accomplish something. Its design was created towards a specific goal in mind. Instead of its goal being, I don't want to be offensive to anyone, or I want to be appealing to as many people as possible, right? That is technically a goal, but it's going to lead to, it's a bad design goal. It's going to lead to unfocused, wandering, midstream, quasi shitty game design. And I think that's what you're going to, that's what we've seen a lot of that. Yeah. Anyways. Thanks, Brovlef. Appreciate that. Thanks, Vin, for mocking me. So, real quickly here. We got ourselves a nice little stream. We got Fighter at S, broken. We've got a solid A tier at low level. Thaumaturge, just because they've got a lot of really cool abilities. They can really function. The Rogue is a solid damage dealer with a lot of versatility, good skill selection. The Bard, Inspire Courage, really, really powerful. And at low level, the Bard can almost function as a melee combatant in certain circumstances. The Cleric, Divine Font, plus the War Priest, and even the Cloister Cleric with extra Divine Font. Very, very potent at low levels. When everyone's clamoring for spells, getting 3 or 4 bonus spells is a big deal. In our B tier, you have a lot of solid martial characters. Barbarian, Champion, Gunslinger, Monk. Everyone called Pathfinder the Martial Edition, and this really shows why. These are great classes with a lot of strengths. They usually are paying a price somewhere. They might be a little singularly focused. They might not have a lot of versatility. They might have to eat up some actions in order to do their thing, but fundamentally, they're really good. Sorcerer, I think we're going to see over the course of Pathfinder 2, is the best caster. And while at the low level, they're still hampered by the lack of spell slots, they still come in at a solid B. At C tier, we have the lion's share of our classes. Totally playable, respectable classes. Druid, Ranger, Magus, Psychic, Summoner, Swashbuckler, and Wizard. Some of these classes don't really feel like they have enough of a punch to really be at a B tier or A tier for the hoops that you're going through to get. But for the most part, these classes all perform totally reasonably well, and you're not going to be disappointed. A lot of these classes are going to be moving as we go up, because a lot of these spellcasting classes do get better as you get more and more spell slots available to you. In our D tier, classes that function but I think are underpowered. Witch, Investigator, Inventor. Inventor is kind of all over the place. It could be a melee character class, but it's multiple attribute ability dependency, and a lot of the things that it does could be replicated through other magical items or spells. The Witch kind of really is just a bad wizard. And the Investigator is, unless you're in a very specific type of campaign, is kind of just a bad rogue. And lastly, the Alchemist and the Oracle. Classes whose class abilities I feel are not only weak, but in some cases just don't even seem to be worth going through the process of engaging with them. The Alchemists rely on consumables and alchemical items, which I don't think are strong enough, and a lot of the information we've learned from Paizo and Pathfinder 2 employees has told us that consumables went through a series of rapid revisions towards the end of the Pathfinder 2 testing phase, and I think the Alchemist has suffered the price for this. The Alchemist doesn't really know what it wants to do or what it wants to be, and it doesn't have the number of feats or available options to really truly be as versatile as it should be, and, like the spellcasters, at low level is extremely hampered by the number of infusions available to it each day, which makes it even worse off than it otherwise would be, which would still probably be an F. Lastly, the Oracle is just locked into the worst tradition, has no bonus spells, and has this mystery curse function, which is not worth the price you're paying in order to get what you're getting. So that's it. Those are our tiers. So that's pretty exciting. Mazel tov. All right. Oh, we had a super chat. Sorry, Vin, I missed that. Regarding the Investigator, thoughts on That's Odd again. That's Odd is a very strange... It stands out in Pathfinder 2 as being like probably one of the most indie game mechanics in all of Pathfinder 2. I mean, certainly I'm be comfortable running for it, but I think that a lot of people... You know what That's Odd is? This is what's interesting to me about the Investigator. Okay, I've heard this complaint before. I'm not a 5th edition master, but bear with me on this. I've heard the complaint that people complain about 5th edition Rangers because you choose a Ranger because you want to be good at outdoorsy stuff. And then the way so you pick a Ranger. And when you pick a Ranger, you get a number of class features and abilities, and they basically amount to saying something like, you automatically pass all your checks, you never get lost, you always have enough food, you can forage for food safely, you know how to get through all these areas completely fine, you move at total overland speed increased, and you never get hampered by terrain. And what it really does is eliminate the wilderness from even being a challenge. So it's like you wanted to be a ranger because you wanted to engage with the wilderness. But then by being a ranger, you kind of don't have to engage with the wilderness anymore. That's Odd is similar to this because That's Odd. You wanted to be an investigator because you as a character or as a player are interested in investigating. But That's Odd sort of makes it so that you don't actually have to investigate. The GM will just investigate for you. Like, I don't know if I'm describing this correctly, but it's like, That's Odd is just sort of like, because I mean, like the way that That's Odd is written, when you walk into a room, I feel like most GMs are just going to be like, yeah, you see the murder weapon, you know, like that's odd. Yeah, the desk drawer is open where the murder weapon is, or where the note that the NPC left with the ledger that tells you where the next part of the adventure is. That's odd. It's sort of like the autopilot mode that a video game might have, right? It just kind of like plays the investigation for you. So it's weird. It's really actually powerful, but it's like odd because it's the moment when you take it, it kind of like does the work for you. All right, it's another super chat from Mr. Self-Confessed. The reason I ask, building a bunch of new skill feats, check the Discord, and maybe a future battle cry. And I like the idea of adding more things like that's odd for social skills, society, and diplomacy. Well, Self-Confessed Cynic, you're going to want to hold on that. Because I know you hate Powered by the Apocalypse. This month, what I am working on, in fact, I'll probably be working on it on my birthday weekend, is I am writing an article about how to add Powered by the Apocalypse style knowledge gaining skills or knowledge actions or moves, and adding those and sort of rewriting recall knowledge in Pathfinder 2. And that's odd doesn't need to exist in that world that I am envisioning with this recall knowledge system because of the way that it works. Now, that being said, I think there's definitely a place for skill feats in that universe, and I definitely think there's a place for those skill feats involving society and diplomacy. But I definitely would not do it the way that that's odd works. If that's how this automatic, it's too reactive. That's what I don't like about it. Remember, I'm all about player agency, folks. I like for players to make decisions. That's odd is basically you saying, GM, man, take me on a ride. What's going on? What's odd? You know, you're not engaging. You're just letting the GM tell you what he thinks is important. I just don't like it. So that's what I don't like about it. But ultimately, I would say this. I don't like that's odd. How about that? By the way, for people who are watching and don't want to look it up, you can look it up in the Archives of Neth. What are we talking about? Basically, whenever you enter a new location, you immediately notice one thing out of the ordinary. It's so strange. So it's and you're paying a feat for it. It's like that's odd equals that's lame. It's just strange to me because you wanted to be an investigator, right? Because you wanted to investigate. But that's odd makes it so that you don't have to investigate. The GM just tells you what's going on, basically. And so it's very strange. Also, like, if you didn't have that's odd, and so the GM didn't tell you something immediately, and then you look around and you say, hey, GM, my investigator looks around the room. Is there anything odd or out of the ordinary? What do they do then? I can't tell you that. You didn't take that's odd. It's like, you know, your brain explodes. Like, what's going on? Like, it creates this like time vortex. I don't know. Make a check. It's like, okay. Well, I failed the check, folks. I guess we can leave now. Or I thought you were an investigator. I don't know. I look in the drawer. Okay, well, you failed your perception check, so you don't see that it's got a blood stain on it. How do I not see that? I'm looking at the drawer, right? It just doesn't work. I would argue what White Spider here is saying is even worse. The GM directs the investigator to something noteworthy in the room. The noteworthy thing doesn't have to be relevant to anything. Could 100% be a nothing burger or a red herring. That's even worse. It's even worse. Even the GMG, someone pointed out to me the other day, the GMG has a section about recall knowledge and failing and lying to your party. And then it basically says, but you really don't actually want to do this. And if you do it, you kind of want to do it like in a way that like it'll become almost immediately apparent that you were lying to them. Or you kind of want to do it in a funny and jokey way, because if you were to like lie to them and like about something important, and then they were to like take actions that would actually like rely on that being true, that would really be unfun. And, you know, you probably shouldn't do that. And it's like buried in the GMG somewhere. And it's like, why the fuck did you design this game this way then? So anyways, So what's interesting here, what Frostraven's talking about here is, and that's fine, I like these mechanics, but it's weird because it's in Pathfinder 2, which doesn't have these. So I talk about GNS theory a lot, gamist, narrativist, simulationist. But there has been a new score, which I've been kind of working with, and a lot of times it supplants simulation. It's not a fourth stat. It's like GNS/E, and the E stands for emulation. Emulation. Emulation is where you are playing a game not to simulate being a character, but to emulate being a character. And the best example I can give of this was from a GDC conference where they were talking about the Spider-Man video game, where the one where you swing and you swing through the city and you have like the webs. You're swinging on your webs. Here's the thing. You're not simulating Spider-Man swinging through New York City, because if you were, you, the player who is playing the game, would have to be using your joystick and using your control stick and using your buttons to like shoot webs and hit buildings and then swing on them. Instead, the game does all of that for you, and you just move around with your D-pad or with your C-stick, and occasionally your character might like push a shoulder button to do a flip, do a barrel roll or something. But the game kind of does it for you. And so what it does, rather than simulate being Spider-Man, is it's emulating being Spider-Man. Spider-Man is a web-swinging badass. You, the player, are not a web-swinging badass. But this game will let you feel like you are a web-swinging badass. Now, traditionally, Pathfinder 1, Pathfinder 2, certainly Dungeons & Dragons 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, and 5th edition, have never had mechanics like that, for the most part. An emulation type mechanic is very indie and seems very out of place. Like if I was looking through this book and I had the That's Odd Feat, the GM would be like, you notice this That's Odd Feat. Does PF2 make you feel like Spider-Man? No, that's... My point is, you are taking this feat so that you can feel like an investigator, even though you aren't really an investigator. Does that make sense? Like an equivalent feat would be a feat called, what should we do? And when you start combat, the GM, like it's a fighter feat, and you're a fighter. You're supposed to be a master of war, a master of battle. And there's a feat, it's a level 1 fighter feat called, what should we do? And it says, at the start of when initiative is rolled and a combat is about to break out, the GM will give you some ideas about what you should do in this fight so that you could be victorious, right? See how that feels weird? That's fine, because you're like, well, wait, I'm not a fighter. I'm a librarian, and I've never took martial arts a day in my life. I don't know the first thing about combat or tactics or fighting. I don't know anything about that. I don't play Warhammer. I don't play XCOM. I don't play any of these things, but I'm playing a role-playing game, and I want to be a really good fighter. And a really good fighter, my character, would absolutely know what the right thing to do in this fight would be. So I'm taking this feat that when a fight starts, the GM will tell me what tactics I should use to, get an advantage on this fight. Because I'm not trying to simulate being a fighter. I want to emulate being a fighter. And the classic example of this is, as Brothos was saying, is any sort of intelligence score, right? I don't know anything about undead, Derek, but my character does, and they have a high intelligence score. And this has always been a point of contention in role-playing games, right? Now, unfortunately, like I always say, we don't flip it the other way, right? Like you could have a character, a person who has, maybe they have anxiety, maybe they have, they're not comfortable speaking in front of groups, but they want to play a really charming, smooth-talking, suave, debonair character who has an 18 charisma and is a master in diplomacy and in bluff, and right? they play these games so that they can emulate being that type of character. And so when you have a GM who says, no, you have to role play it. I want to hear it. I don't do skill checks. We role play in our campaign. You are doing that character a great disservice. It's the same thing with the Investigator, where you go, no, you don't get to make checks. You don't get to make investigation checks. You don't get to follow a lead. You don't get to use that odd. You need to tell me every single nook and cranny that you look behind and look and think. And if that sounds like, well, that's crazy, that's what D&D was for 20 years, because there were no skills. And so you had to simulate everything that you were doing. For your character to be good at finding stuff, you, the player, had to be good at finding stuff. And some people really like that style, and some people don't. And that, to me, is like the single greatest divide between old school and new school games. All right. Anyways, we've gone over time. It's almost 10 o'clock. Josh. Oh, this is in profit, by the way. Yes, we did put it at the bottom. Brothleth, I completely agree with you. I'm right on. We did a video about this. I don't remember what the video was called. You know, we're getting to that point in our YouTube career where we have enough videos that I don't always remember all of our videos. But we did a video on this early on about skill checks. And it was like, do skill checks ruin role playing or something like that? And we talked about this at length. And people have this crazy double standard when it comes to that. It's like, well, wait a second, I don't understand. Why didn't he have to make a check? Well, he role played really well, so he didn't have to make a check to convince the mayor, because we're role playing, and to them that means speaking in a funny voice, and so he gets to make a check. I'm like, okay, so the next time we're in combat and I really describe well how I cut the guy's head off, can that like be an automatic crit? I'm just like, no. It's like, okay. Anyways, now I also agree with what Steven said. I think role playing a dumb character smart is bad role playing. It's like Inception there. RPG! So anyway, it's almost 10 o'clock. I want to thank everybody for coming out tonight. If you want to keep this conversation going, people are going to be talking about this on the Discord. We're going to be talking about it tonight. We're going to be talking about it tomorrow. Check us out, patreon.com/Knights of the Last Call. We have several tiers. I really recommend the champion tier, because that's going to get you all of our future PDF content, our monthly Battle Cry e-zine, as well as any other bonus PDF content that we continue to drop. But Knight is $5, Squire's $3, Heroes $25 if you want the premium and really want to show your support and love for the channel. Thank you to everybody who came out tonight, supported us. We had a good crowd tonight, 80, 90 people, which was awesome. We tapped at 112 people at one point, so that was pretty cool to see. Big stream for us. We needed this. We've been talking about Root and Legend of the Five Rings, and no one's been showing up. What the hell, guys? But want to say thanks to our patrons, thanks to our supporters, thanks to our YouTube subscribers, thank you to our YouTube subscribers, but also thank you to our YouTube members, our adventurers of Last Call as well. That is going to wrap it for us. Saturday is my birthday. There may be a surprise Saturday birthday stream. I might be drinking. We'll see. Otherwise, we'll see you next Tuesday. That's the 27th. And that's going to be our Quest for the Frozen Flame game. So definitely worth checking that out.
Steven tipped $25. I was there for those videos.
Nice. Steven coming in with a final snipe for the hype boss, and flexing on his length of time that he has been with the channel. Thank you, Steven, for that tip. Appreciate it so much. Thanks everybody for coming out. Thank you to everyone who supported us. And again, if you're interested in keeping these conversations going, with talking with people that are even smarter than me, check out our Patreon, patreon.com/Knights-Last-Call. We will see you next Tuesday, maybe Saturday, on Knights of Last Call.